Hey guys, Kinggath here with the Kinggath podcast. That was a weird way I just introduced myself. Oh well. Welcome to another episode. And in this one, I have the unique privilege of introducing a mod author who just released their first mod. It went to the top of Hot Files immediately. And this is a very, very exciting thing to see because it doesn't happen that often. So I don't know how many more opportunities I would get to do this. Not only did she just have an awesome mod come up, but she's also the lead narrative designer for Sim Settlement's next big thing, our next expansion. And welcome, NikaCola.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you here. We've actually been talking about you coming on the podcast for a while because you showed me a chunk of this mod. And for those who don't know, the mod is called The Machine in Her. I'm sure it'll still be on Hot Files by the time this podcast goes live, but maybe not. I'm not actually sure how the Hot Files work. I have a rough idea. Like I think it's based on hitting a certain velocity of endorsements, but I don't know how long it stays there.
Yeah.
So it'll probably still be there when this podcast comes out. But if it's not, it's called The Machine in Her. It is a you describe it as a companion / quest mod.
Yeah, it's got about like 4 or 5 hours of content, and a lot of it's dialogue. It's not very combat focused, but it's just one of those things that I kind of tried to make like an all-encompassing experience. There's a radio station with a DJ that's also kind of a major character in the story itself, and I just wanted to do something a little kind of different, a little more of a role playing and like writing / dialogue heavy mod rather than like a dungeon crawler per se, with lots of enemies and things like that.
So much more focus on the RPG aspect of paying attention to what the character says and responding accordingly.
Right, yeah, just
Okay.
just dialogue heavy and kind of story focused. And it's one of those things that it took a long time to get that right and to tweak it to the point where it seemed enjoyable to me, and I'm really glad and grateful and just kind of overwhelmed so far that people seem to really be responding to that, and it's been a pretty intense 48 hours the last couple of days.
Oh yeah, the first when you first drop a mod, it's crazy
Yeah.
because you've got all these posts coming in. There's a lot of positivity. You've got the people who are just negative like crazy, and then you've got people who are like, okay, I'm ready to play it, but I need you to do this
Yeah.
first. It's just a whirlwind of stuff coming at you.
Yeah, there's lots of feature requests already, and hey, can I do this, and why can't I do that, and some of it's reasonable. Like there's some stuff that I'm definitely gonna the first patch is gonna address some of the things people have brought up to me that I think makes a lot of sense, and some of it is pie in the sky. Like hopefully, maybe I'll do my best kind
Right,
of
right.
thing. But yeah, just to have it out there is such a relief. It's been 2+ years in development, and I think like you mentioned, yeah, I showed you a small chunk of it before I joined on with Sim Settlements, and that was probably the most complete thing I had at the time. And since then, it's just kind of ballooned out from there.
Yeah, well, that piece was very, very impressive. Like when you sent that, I was like, "Yes, this is exactly who I need." Because when we did, and you joined up right after we released Conqueror, so
Yep.
I'm guessing something in Conqueror inspired you to join us.
It did.
But we'll talk about that in a minute. But that when you showed me that clip, I was like, "That's what I want to do." Like that's the type of stuff because it was very cinematic. It felt like a cutscene more than just a dialogue scene because Bethesda started down that road with Fallout
Yes,
4.
they did.
Like, there's a few scenes in the game in the early part where it feels like a very cinematically done, like lots of controlled camera movement and very specific things going on, and it was really cool. It felt very, very modern for Fallout, and that to me, if they had stuck with that all the way through, I think it would have made the game better, and I think it would have sold us harder on the voiced player. Instead, there's just been nonstop. There's always pushback against the voiced player as being like a negative part of Fallout 4. When I thought that beginning parts are amazing, like that scene with Piper and the door and everything,
Yeah,
and her with
Diamond
the gun,
City.
where it's all motion capped. That stuff's great.
I think that's like I felt exactly the same way, and I think that's kind of what maybe some of the pushback was all about, was that they sort of halfway committed to it. I think they didn't really make people happy who liked the more cinematic stuff, and they also upset everybody who liked the old system. And I think the
Right.
kind of halfway part, to me, it just feels like that's what ended up happening. They, like you said, they started off wanting to do that, and then it just kind of fizzled out. I think I don't know if they saw how hard it was to do, or or maybe they just like, never mind. I don't know. I honestly, I couldn't even say for sure, but yeah, it did make me sad after that initial opening scene. There was really so little of that throughout the rest of the game.
Yeah, it definitely felt to me like my thought is one of two things happened. Either one, they decided to go down that road and then partway through realized like, oh crap, this is going to add like 3 years to our dev time,
Right.
or it was like one of those things. We've actually talked about this in the past, but I don't know if I've talked about it with anybody else on the podcast about the fact that the first chunk of the game is clearly designed, like the first hour of the game is designed to be a very curated experience to show you everything that's going to come in the game and try and hook players in. Like it's very, very linear, beat by beat. You're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. You're going to get a chance to experience all these things and get a taste for the full game, and it's very highly polished. Like the beginning, from the moment you do the mirror scene till after you kill the Deathclaw, it's all super polished. And I wonder if that was part of it too. If it was like, all right, let's get that chunk all done with the motion capture and like with cameras, and then from there back to our old way.
Yeah, like I think they set up those systems exactly like you said, and they made full use of them for that whole kind of introductory section, and then they just maybe we'll never know like what happened, like why they dropped it after that. But I think you're right. I think it's really the whole, this is going to add 3 years to our development time. Like I think that's got to be it, because it does involve, I think by necessity, just all this much more complexity, and especially in an open world game, people want to be able to walk away during conversations or just shoot people in the middle of them, and that really interrupts the whole cinematic experience. Being able to do that. So.
Yeah, I wonder if that was maybe part of it too. Of like if they at some point if they figured out, okay, we're gonna switch over to this general, because you can see they did it with 76 where they're like, we're gonna stick to this principle of like no NPCs. Like maybe they decided no like no scene is too important and you got to be able to pull out of them all, and then that changed the whole dev cycle. There's also the chance that something like that happened, like at a philosophical level of we're gonna do this in the game no matter what.
Yeah, I think people really give Fallout 4 a hard time for the limited kind of role-playing potential, and they just didn't go very deep with the story. But I'm sympathetic, honestly, especially after creating this mod, which I really wanted to be a cinematic kind of linear story sequence, that there's so many ways to break that. And I understand, I think, why they kept the story pretty minimal. And I think people forget everyone loves New Vegas, and I love New Vegas too, but you can't walk away mid-conversation. Like you can't, there's a lot of things that you can't just do, that Obsidian, I think, did a really good job of kind of disguising that, but it was still something that it was kind of that same controlled experience that I don't think is really possible with the Fallout, or at least I haven't found a way to do it in the Fallout 4 engine yet.
Sure, to have it fully, to have that fully dynamic feel where you're not breaking things all the time. Yeah, I don't know what to do about it, because that is probably one of my biggest time investments anymore with Conqueror when we do story patches, is just like these scene work, especially, and it gets infinitely more complex for two reasons. In the way we're doing it, there is we almost all of our conversations, and Super Weevil, if you're listening, this is going to sound like I'm knocking on it, but I love it. He insists on them having like 3 to 12 characters in each one.
All the actors.
So then I've got to make sure they're all moving around in place. So that complicates it, and then we have to do it. Most of them happen in settlements, which means the player could have put anything. So it's like we're asking for a train wreck every time. But even without that, even doing just stage stuff, like most of your stuff is all in specific locations, right?
Yes.
Even that can fall apart.
Yes. Like one of the first things I ran into with beta testing, which I'm so grateful, Thuggy Smurf helped kind of coordinate the semi-public beta for that, which I was so grateful for. But most of those kind of more hardcore modders have these mods where you can have like 10 followers, and so there's so now in every one of my scenes there is 10 actors, like just other followers just sandboxing around and getting in the way. So I had to write that on the on the recommendation part of the mod page, was like, hey, if you like to have 10 followers, that's awesome. Just maybe dismiss them before you play this, because you probably are going to break a lot of the scenes. Just because, an actor, because you've done this in the CK, an actor wants to be on this marker, and if they can't get there, the scene just hangs until they can find a way to get there, or you build in some other failsafe.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a lot to account
for. And the failsafes suck, too. They're always like teleport. It's like, come on.
And that just breaks immersion. And I've tried to find I remember I was so heartbroken when I realized that, and this sounds terrible, but I was heartbroken when I realized that players could have the dialogue camera just turned off altogether,
Oh,
in
I
their
know. That's
settings. I
terrible.
know. I think that's like I completely understand why they would do it. Like I'm sympathetic. I get it. I really do. I just think like, oh my God, like because sometimes I use that camera like to hide ugly things happening in the background. And if
Right.
they've got the camera off, the dialogue camera off, then they're just seeing all of that, all of these chess pieces moving around, and the magic is gone, you know?
You know what? I've been playing this game literally every day for like 4 years now. Well, that's what it feels like. Not literally, but
I'm sure it feels
and
like
I
that.
just found out about that option in the last week. Like I
Oh
had no
no,
idea that was there
I
until
thought we
until
talked
I was
about
trying to
that.
fix my.
Oh my God.
I think I must have just thought you were talking about something else, or
Yeah.
I just was agreeing to keep the conversation
I'm
flowing.
sure.
But
Yeah.
I remember finding that, and I just like did a double take, and I
Yeah.
was like, that no, that's not what I
Yep.
think it is it?
Yep, it is.
I bet most people don't know that that's there.
Well, now
So,
we'll
I
have
would-
to cut this part out so no
well,
one
now
knows.
we've outed it. Yeah, bury the secret. Take it to your grave.
That's right. Yep, no one can know.
But yeah, so not only is it if they don't make their, I guess we should give a little bit of more background so we're not just talking shop without anybody understanding what we're talking about. So when we're setting up these dialogue scenes, so that's like any of the scene where the camera goes to the player or close up on the NPC and they're talking and there's movement and stuff. If any NPC can't finish what they're told to do, they will just continue to try forever unless you put in either you set it up so that it doesn't matter, where then the follow-up scene might break because now they're not where you expect them to be, or you have to like put a timer in and then force them into a location. There's just no great solution, and some of it's extra bad. Like I've started using a lot of deaths in scenes where it's like one character has to kill another, and if the character doesn't die, they just stare at you.
Yeah. Really awkward. Yeah. Like, are you gonna kill
and
me
so
or
then
not here?
thing right, it's like, what's going on here? And like there's no clear indication to the player that something went wrong.
Nope.
Like it might be, oh, maybe that was this dramatic pause, and they're like, no, this is just terrible.
It's just broke. Yeah, it just broke.
It's just broken. And then we don't have great solutions. So we've got like the teleport is one. You can make the actions not matter, but that's pretty much it. There's not really any other things we can't even cut the camera without like we don't even have full control of the camera either. So anybody who's played Rise of the Commonwealth, we have that we do the camera, what I call cinematic mode. That's actually just a trick. All I do is hide the interface and move the player around. That's not actually. We can't control the camera. It's crazy.
No, when I first saw that, I saw a YouTube video for that, and I saw that cinematic mode, and I almost and at this point, I was a nobody in the mod community. I mean, I still am, but like at that point, like I had never shown my work to anybody, and I almost wanted to like email you somehow and be like, "How did you do that?" Because I've been trying to do things like that, with the camera, because you clearly it was like a really beautiful aerial shot, and I just could not figure out how you'd done that.
That's called math.
Yeah, right, and
that's the beauty of math.
yeah, and I thought that was a really clever workaround, and I think I tried to do something like that, like once we had talked about it, and then I realized like I'm really bad at math, so I can't, that's that's not my realm. But absolutely, yeah, like we don't have full control over the dialogue camera, and that has frustrated me from day one. Like it tries to help you sometimes, and you can't see me, but I'm doing like huge bunny rabbit like ear quotes, it tries to help, and it's not helping.
Yeah, my favorite one that I've been catching a lot of lately is that the camera is actually well designed. Like I get what they were going for, and I like that they did this, that they systemized it. Is that they have like a bunch of shots that can have happened in a dialogue. So if you look in the creation kit, it'll be listed like over left hand shoulder target, over left hand shoulder speaker, and like there's all these combinations of things, or it'll be like pulled back mid, and then there's a bunch like with camera phraseology that I don't know anything about. Cinematographers, if you looked in there, it's probably all written in your parlance, but it tries to use those, but some of them don't take in basic things into account within the game. Like none of them take into account the gigantic size of power armor shoulders.
Yep.
So all the time, if you're in power armor, your shoulders are just blocking the entire shot of the NPC talking, which looks really dumb.
Yep. Well, and
that's the sort of thing that it does when it's automating.
right, and I think I see what you mean about the whole like the it is a good system because you don't really have to do anything with it to get a decent looking dialogue scene. Like if you just want two characters talking, you don't really have to do anything, and it'll give you different camera angles that look pretty decent. And usually there's not a wall that gets in the way. It kind of
Usually.
accounts for that usually. Now if you're in a
Yeah.
settlement, like you're having to do, like that's a whole different kind of thing. But most of the cutscenes in the vanilla game, no matter where they happen, look decent enough. You know, the camera works pretty well in that automated way. It's just once you start trying to control it, once you start trying to get certain shots in certain ways on certain characters or objects, it just kind of, for me, has been, again, a years long process in figuring out how to kind of nudge it gently, you know, in the ways that I would like to work if possible.
Yeah, and it's not just the camera either. It's like the AI on
Oh,
top of
yeah.
it, and the AI often has an effect on the way the camera works because the camera has to have a target, and generally you make it the speaker. So then all of a sudden they can throw a second wrench into the camera movement,
Yep. Like sometimes,
which is where that it's like it's where those 10 followers become a problem
right.
because they can push each other around.
Yes, and if like sometimes it can be cool to have like the camera perspective be an actor. So like it's like you see what the actor sees, but if that actor does a random rubbing their face animation or you know something like that, then you just have to deal with that in your cutscene, and it can ruin
Right.
it. So
Yeah.
I think it's a great system for just drag and drop dialogue, so to speak, to make it look pretty decent. I think it works real well for that. But anything else, anything that you try to make or direct, is kind of a God help you sort of situation. At least in my experience, it has been.
Well, and it's funny that the system, like if they had just done the dialogue system like that with interesting camera angles without the player side of things, but just like kept changing the
Yeah.
camera angle on the character, it would work perfect for the old school way of doing Fallout games, where it would have been like, well, that's way more interesting than me just zooming in on their face and
Yeah.
staring at their nose.
Yep. Especially.
But instead, it doesn't work well with the back and forth.
No, yeah, because I think when I first joined the Sim Settlements team, we talked with somebody. We had a group voice chat with somebody who had experience like working in television and movies, and
Yeah, that was Shadow
Shadow
Puppet.
Puppet, right? Now I remember.
Yeah.
And he had some like really great advice on just like the proper sequence of shots and how they should be arranged and set up. And I was just listening to that, like, God, I really wish I had the kind of control that he's used to having on set. You know, like I wish I could guarantee that this shot would not interrupt that line of sight or that, you know, it's called something I can't remember now, but that
Yeah,
golden
yeah.
ratio of shots. You know, like I wish I could do that. That would be amazing. But it's one of those things. It's a challenge. It's been difficult, but you know, ultimately after a few years of just trying and trying, I think I've gotten to the point where I kind of know how it works and how to get it to show the things that I'm trying to get the player to see, and you know, so far the feedback from the mod, the machine in her, has been pretty good in that regard. So I feel very fortunate that didn't just all fall apart at the last minute.
I think that, well, I think it's been worth it. Like, even though it's a struggle and you bash your head against a scene for weeks trying to get it working correctly, to me, even though it probably only works in real time for 30% of players, like the fact that I get it to work once for myself, that's like one of those like touchdown dance moments I feel so
Yes,
good
it
about.
is.
And then I get to still use it to build at least one piece of solid footage to send to the voice actors to use in their demo reels, to post on YouTube as a spoiler. Like that alone just feels worth it, just
It
because
does.
it's like an epic battle, and then at the end of it, you just feel triumphant, and that's fantastic.
And it is, I mean, it is an epic battle, you know, just going again and again until you finally win, you know, and you get that shot that you wanted, and then you're like me and you realize you weren't recording it, so you have to you have to start all over. But yeah, no, I know what you mean. I think when it works, it's beautiful and really something that I think players really appreciate. I hope they do.
I think so. I
Yeah.
think we've gotten some pretty like explosive feedback where people are like, "Holy crap! Holy crap! Holy crap! How did you do that?"
Yeah.
On various forums where we get comments or messages where they're just blown away. And you're going to get the same soon with some of the stuff I've seen from Machine and Her. And I haven't played through it yet. I told you I was going to play through it on my Let's Play. And so then you withheld the beta from me. Like, no,
I was like, I'm not ready.
I
don't think I'm ready to be seen by the world quite at that point. But I think we're there now. If you want to give it a play.
Yeah, I'm gonna be tossing in my load order soon, so I'll probably give you a patch or two to work out the worst bugs.
Thank you.
But yeah, it's I loved the fact that you were embracing that cinematic style, and you really cared about character movement and stuff, because that's something that we've taken a new focus on, because I really want to step up the standards for modding. I think that we're at this crazy time. I don't know if it's as epic as to say time in history, but like we're at this point where there are so many people who are underemployed, people who don't have enough challenging work that's meaningful to them. A lot of people with amazing creative talents combined with easier tools to use than ever, that there are basically more than enough people with professional quality skills out there just idling who can come together and basically put together a video game for free. And like that's what I want to do. I love doing it this way, and so anybody else who shows that kind of passion and wants to build at that quality level, I'm just like, let's go, let's get in here. So when you threw that stuff at me, I could see that in your work, and it was like, all right, you definitely want you working on something with us. And then obviously you had your own project. When you had sent me that, I had assumed that was like you were about to release that thing because it looked so polished. I had no idea that you had as much to go as you did. And I'm glad you finally got it to release because it looked like it's a hell of a passion project.
It was, and to be honest, at that point, I think that was in January of this last year when I sent you that, and from a story perspective, it was pretty much ready to go, but I got some advice from a few different people that I think was really good advice. It was that basically hey, no one knows if you're able to tell a story in a video game or not. Like, you haven't proven that. So what you should do is tell the story you want to tell, but also make sure that the follower, whose name is Kit, make sure she's awesome. Just add features to her. Make sure that the mod is awesome to play, completely irrespective of the story. Just so that you can hook people like that, and then maybe they'll like the story if they keep playing it. And so that kind of pushed me back by a while, because there was a lot to do there. With Kit was pretty bare bones as a companion back then, and the radio station, all that stuff, that was still very theoretical and not really in the game. And so I went back, and that's really what added. I intended to release almost this time last year, and adding all that stuff added about a year to the development cycle. And it's ironic, actually, most of the comments, I would say 80% I've gotten have been about the writing and the story, and everybody really has seemed to attach to that. But the other stuff I added, maybe I'll hear comments every now and then about that. But it's kind of ironic to me that most people are just oh yeah, she's a companion. Cool.
I still think your advisor was correct though, because I saw a lot of comments, especially on the video Juice had covered Machine and Her on, which were excited about that thing you did where Kit yells back at the Raiders.
Yes.
I think that was one of your hooks that worked, that got people hyped. And so I think whoever advised you to put in a cool factor, I think was right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I said, I think it was the right call. I really do. And that feature was one of those last minute things that I'd wanted it for months and months, and I couldn't make it work. And finally I just tried this last ditch effort thing, and it worked so well. I actually had to convince my voice actress, Kelly Kipper, who's phenomenal and just was so patient with me over this whole process. I had to convince her, please record these for me. This was the last thing we had to do, just about. And she was like, these are yelling combat barks. Oh no. And I was like, please, I think people are gonna love it. And they really did. And so I'm glad we were able to include that kind of at the last minute. It does seem to be people's kind of favorite feature about Kit, for sure.
Oh, I hope Bethesda steals it right out from under you.
I've had several people. I will say that is one comment I've had from a lot of players, just to me and in the Discord and things. They're like, every companion now that doesn't have this feels incomplete. Like this just feels like something that should have always been there, um, and that to me is a very wonderful compliment. And I do hope it's in the next Bethesda game. I think it would be a really cool feature and bring some life to those.
That's what I say when. Yeah, whenever somebody tells me Bethesda's going to steal your idea, I was like, I don't care. That means the next game's going to be better. Like, go, please do.
I'm like, yeah, it's out there. I would love every companion I play with to do that. Absolutely, that's one of the reasons I wanted it so much as a feature. I've always wanted that. So hopefully we do see it.
Yeah, it's a really cool feature, and it's just like the next step toward making the characters more believable.
Right. I've always thought that was silly. You have people yelling at you, raiders, you're stupid. You can't shoot straight. And I'm like, I would so want to yell back at them, or at least have my friends do that for me,
There's actually I think there's a mod that makes the player shout stuff back. I'm pretty sure I saw somebody's Let's Play recently where they do that, because the player has a bunch of like random stuff that they yell out, and so like it'll make them play that. Or maybe it was like it gives you a button to be able to yell. I don't know. I just remember watching somebody's Let's Play and the player character kept saying stuff, and I was like, that's weird. Somebody will know the mod that does that, and they'll comment below, and we can find it and figure it out.
I'd never heard of that. That sounds pretty great too. I mean, I think that's the next best thing. If you can't get the companion to do it, you should be able to yell it yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was a it's one of the features that I've actually seen made fun of a lot in it, but in the new Wolfenstein game, in Youngblood, I guess one of the things you can do is yell out like support to your, because it's like two sisters, so you yell out like "nice go" and sis, and then you get like a buff or something. So like they fully embrace that idea of like being able to yell at the enemies and yell during combat.
Yeah.
But I think with Kit doing it to the enemies, it just all of a sudden it makes her feel like connected and real to what's going on around you, which is lacking a lot. In fact, I find myself in Bethesda games rarely even playing with a companion, because they just feel like an idiot piece of meat that's getting in my way all the time.
Yeah, like I really tried to kind of fix that as much as within my skill set was possible. One of the things I included that it doesn't always work, but it's kind of it's not really a feature I talked about a lot, was something vanilla companions do that drive me crazy is that they'll, if their combat is over, they don't really seem to care that you're still in combat. If their combat state changes to no combat, then they just kind of stand there while you're getting shot at. And I included some things to keep Kit from doing that. Like if you're getting shot at, she is going to still be in combat. And I think, I don't think that's something, like no one's said anything about that, but I hope that is something that kind of gives her a little more life in comparison to the other companions. Because for as deep and interesting, and I feel like the back end of the vanilla companion system Bethesda did I actually think it's pretty good. I do think it was lacking some things like that.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think the companion system, I love it. I think it's an amazing change from the karma system. I know a lot of people that's a divisive statement. A lot of people just love the karma system. I think the companion system is more grounded in reality, of that, your whether you're good or bad is relative to the person that you're standing in front of.
Right.
So I loved it. I loved that as their replacement for that system. But it did feel like in combat and outside of the handful of scenes that those characters were involved in, they were kind of lifeless.
Yeah.
Which is a bit of a bummer. And then on top of it, they do stupid things like you're talking about, where they don't stay in combat, making them feeling left or even more lifeless. They even when they were in combat, they weren't very useful. Like even if you decked them out, I would say with a crazy good weapon, they were still missing most of the time. They were like stormtroopers.
Yeah.
It's like, you want an extra stormtrooper with you, because that's what you get.
Just the worst shot in the world. Can't hit
right,
anything, just hitting their head on everything all the time.
Then running into walls and so then I get to watch bad AI pathing all the time.
I couldn't fix the AI pathing, unfortunately. That was one of those things kind of had to just deal with and roll with. But yeah, no, I agree 100%. There were some shortcomings there that I think, because they got so much closer to being grounded, like you said, I think it just made the shortcomings more noticeable, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the things Bethesda gets a lot of flack for, is the fact that they haven't embraced the same method and limitations that most other game companies have done. like they try and systemize everything, whereas I think most game companies who want to have a first-person action AAA experience tend to go the more animated route, where everything is very, very tightly controlled and not as prone to physics. And so so their games are just going to come out tighter. Where Bethesda seems to like really want everything to be abstracted and systemized, so you can see it. Even their dialogue camera is 100% dynamic, and so like I think that the game can start to suffer from that, but I also think that's one of its strengths, is that you get to have these crazy dynamic moments that couldn't happen in most other games.
Yeah, and I really feel like they're one of the last studios doing that. Like I don't really play or hear of many other games that do that. That even try to do that, and I think that's so. For as many frustrating moments as I've had in various Bethesda games and developing in the CK, like I still appreciate what they're doing, like what they are, and how different that is.
Yeah, I agree. I 100%. And I think what I would love to see is continue to go that route of systemizing everything, but then also don't tie our hands when we want to do tight stuff. Like there's for everyone watching. This is something Nika and I have tried to break over and over again, and we can't do it. And maybe somebody out there listening knows how to, but for whatever reason, you can create new camera movements in the creation kit, but the game only will acknowledge its vanilla ones that come with it. That doesn't make any sense to me, because even the Fallout 4 ESM is essentially just a mod. Like at the core, it's just modding the engine itself. And so the fact that that handful must be hard coded to the EXE makes no sense whatsoever to me.
I don't understand. Like I've just made literal copies of those vanilla camera angles and shots, and I changed nothing, like just absolutely nothing in the change, and it just doesn't work. Like every time I try to use that camera, it fails.
Yeah, I'm trying to do the exact same thing, thinking that like, all right, well maybe I made a mistake, so let's go copy of vanilla and let's make sure that maybe there's not some weird limitation with this. And you would never expect that to be the case. So that's what's odd about it, is you can see they clearly have a lot of engineers on their team who like to be clever, so, like software guys who just want everything to be fully open. Like Papyrus is amazing. It is it has its flaws, but it is an amazing virtual machine that it doesn't like. That's way overkill for what it needs, for what they're doing for most quest scripting. And like you can see, then that means they have people who are really passionate about that. So then for them to put in weird limitations like that is very strange. And I'm sure it's probably those types of things when I see them in systems, because I do them myself occasionally. It usually means either one of two things: either there was too much pressure on the engineer to get onto the next project, or they grew bored. Of it is usually what happens, and then so it always comes down to just some sort of time crunch came up, and they were like, "All right, I can't fix this. We need to move forward. We'll just hard cap these.
It works enough for now. That's it. Yeah.
Right." So it's likely like that's the sort of thing we'll either get better in the next game, or we'll just get completely removed.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious. I'm really curious and interested to see which way Bethesda goes with their next big release. And you mentioned Papyrus. I think it's an amazing language. I have nothing like the knowledge that you do about it, obviously. I think it's an amazing language just because I was able to learn it. Like I've never, we've talked about this, like, and you've seen my code, and
I had to gut a few of your scripts.
Yes, you did. And because, and I think it's real obvious.
But they worked.
I mean, they worked, but
yeah.
I think, you could see really obviously I am not a programmer at all.
Sure.
And I could still learn how to do Papyrus, and I think that's something that I've really tried to share with people. When they come to me like, "Hey, how did you even get started with this?" I'm like, honestly, it is. Trust me, if I can do it, if I can learn this language, and to the extent to make it sort of function, like you can too. Like, and you don't have to be a lifelong programmer. You don't have to do it for a living. It certainly helps, but that is not the world that I came from. So if I can learn it, anybody can. That's just my little spiel about that.
I'd agree. I think, and that's where I started going down the road of. I've done one tutorial on Papyrus so far. I definitely will do more. But
I loved that one. Yeah.
I went probably way deeper than I should have, because I had a conversation on the forums of. Should I try and teach people to program, or should I just teach them Papyrus? And everybody's like, don't try and teach people to program. That's insane. Like there are like college courses. There are thousands of tutorials on how to do that. Like clearly it's a bigger job than your channel, and I think that's fair. But then I like went into like the deepest part of Papyrus I could, and I spent an hour and a half explaining like a 4-line script. So if you want to get started somewhere, I could point you to that if anybody listening who wants to learn Papyrus stuff. But really, I found the best way to learn it. Obviously, I came from a programming background, so it was easy for me to pick up. But I found the best way to do this and to do any modding with Bethesda's games is just go find something in the game that's remotely similar to what you're trying to do that Bethesda did, and just start playing with that. Just start tweaking it and see if you can get it to do, slowly edge it toward what you want it to do.
And then you'll never forget the first time you hit compile and it actually just compiles. Like, it doesn't yell at you. I always remember that. That was like a huge moment for me personally. But
oh, for sure. Because because you have at that point you don't know what you're doing. You're like, well, I think I did something correct, and it's like, no,
every time,
over and over again.
And it's just like, it's like that crappy friend, who only calls you when something's wrong. If everything's right, you never hear anything. It's just you only get complaints from the compiler.
Once, without scaring you, I'll try not to scare you and say that sometimes it tells you everything's okay.
No, see, that does scare me.
That's when you get into monstrosities like sim settlements.
God.
That can happen. I don't anticipate that happening for most people scripting. But the scripts that I had played around with yours had the telltale signs of somebody who wasn't a programmer in them, but they still functioned. But they also showed me, like, it was something that I see a lot of with people sending me scripts to look at, is people got their information from Skyrim. And like that was definitely the case for like the last script I worked on of yours, where it was like a bunch of nested while loops, and it's like that was necessary for Skyrim, not so much in Fallout 4. And that's one of the interesting things about, another interesting thing about the way Bethesda does things is they do something I love and I try and do myself, which is like keep their stuff backwards compatible, or I guess that would be forward compatible. Either way, a lot of their old code and systems, like most of the knowledge people came in with from Skyrim, just worked immediately in Fallout 4, which is really cool that they were able to keep some of that intact.
Yeah, like
or so much of it.
I never modded Skyrim, but the that script I sent you with those while loops was from a Skyrim tutorial, so like that's the only way I knew to do that. And when you sent me back like, oh, you could do it like this, I was like, wow, that makes way more sense. But and it really made me happy that Fallout, with Fallout 4, the upgrades to Papyrus, they did include a way that you don't have to do that anymore. This very unsafe thing that I was doing.
Yeah.
So
they did a lot of that, and that's why I'm very impressed with. Like I said, I think Papyrus is overkill in the way they've designed it, and I would be ecstatic if they would continue to go that direction, because the closer they get it to like a compiler level language, the cooler stuff we'll be able to do, and we won't need script extenders. So I anticipate they'll just continue to go that route. I think one of the reasons that they do keep a lot of stuff locked down is because of the way Bethesda develops. So Bethesda tends to do something that I envy greatly, because it would be really fun to see what could come of it, is that they'll put together little teams that are like, you guys are going to go work on this feature, you guys are going to work on this feature, or you three are going to go together and work on quests or whatever. And then so it's like whoever in that squad happens to be the most dangerous programmer, that's who ends up doing their Papyrus. And so there are multiple levels of programmers, but you could generally categorize people in 3 points. Either like absolute novice who's afraid, which is probably what you're at right now.
Yes.
And then there's somebody like me who's been doing it so long that we can code in our sleep. And then there's the guy in the middle who like knows enough and has had enough success where they feel confident, but they don't actually understand what they're doing. And those people are train wrecks to give open access to too much code. And so I think that they're almost protecting themselves with some of the weird limitations and stuff that are in Papyrus, like the fact that there's something all programmers hate, is that there's a cap to arrays of 128 items, and basically that means like if we wanted to set a group of items, it can't be bigger than 128, and that's a big problem if you want to do like giant system mods. But that's also a safety thing, because then some bad programmer can't accidentally create and eat all of the memory on a console and crash the game.
Right.
So, it's
just thinking like,
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how they balance that or make those decisions of like, all right, how much freedom do we want to give our people? How much do we want to protect ourselves from idiot bugs?
Right.
And like in the community side, we just let us break it. Like, just give us all the toys.
I can see that. I do wonder if they set those limits in advance, or if they're discovered by act, like when someone breaks them, they go back and like set the weight,
Oh, I bet it's that. I'm sure it's that. If somebody did something stupid and it's like, all right,
Yeah.
well, that took us 6 months to solve that bug, so let's just prevent that from ever happening again.
Well, and then
That would be how I would do it if I were in their situation.
I think that, I mean, from again my knowledge, so to speak, in lowercase k on that, like, that would make sense for sure. Um, and I've gotten tripped up in the past, with like with scripting and like, 'cause there's something I really want to do, like something in a scene that I want to happen, and I kind of, especially when I first started, like the method was just to kind of just keep doing things until it looked good. In terms of
Hmm.
scripting, and like that is of course not the right way to go about things. um, but I'm hopeful. Like I did a character recently, for the Sim Settlements. I think you know which one it is. It's one that requires a lot of movement and during a scene and a lot of back and forth. That was very difficult to do, but
Yeah.
I was pretty happy. Like I kept the scripting to a minimum on that, and like I remember thinking like, yeah, like a year ago I would have done this very, very differently, and by differently I mean poorly, and you know, so I'm hopeful that like, that has evolved since then, but that was definitely kind of how I came at, which seems different from actual programmers. They kind of want to understand the language, and I think that's like, of course, the right way to go. But for me, it was like, no, I just want to tell this story. I don't really care how I get there. Like what I have to do to this poor papyrus, to get there.
It's there's both types of programmers. I'm definitely in the category of like I am not interested in the theory until after I've dived into the pool. Like I like to just like get in there and just start breaking things. And then once I get deep enough and I've accomplished a few missions, then I'm like, all right, now I should probably go. Like that explains the life of Sim Settlements. If you've ever wondered why Sim Settlements is now so clunky and slow in certain aspects and so polished in others, it's just because like at the beginning, I was just like, I just need to make this work, and so then I would just start slapping stuff together until it did what I wanted it to. And then as we added layers of complexity, then it's like, okay, well, now that thing I did 6 months ago is really stupid. And so now I'm interested in going back, and now I've like since learned, like that's how I discovered the script data limitation in Fallout 4 is like basically once I get far enough along and I've pushed the edges, then I'm like, all right, well, I guess I have to go back and understand the beginning now. So I think there are programmers that come in all shades in that regard. And I think the programmers who are the deep learners and want to do the code very precise and clean and understand how everything works hate people like me, because we cause most of the bugs, and we are the people that tell the people who don't know programming like, oh yeah, I can do that in no time, no problem. So I am that type as well that you just described, and I don't think it's bad. I think that there's a paralysis of indecision that can come if you try and think too deeply about it or try and make it too perfect. And so I think that you need both. I think you need people who are willing to run forward with their programming and just get stuff done and show, get those proof of concepts done. And then you need those like, more conservative programmers who are going to systemize and make sure everything is optimal and stuff. You need a mix. Otherwise you can get stuck real easily. So
I think that makes sense. Like, I'm laughing when you mentioned all the, like the early stuff as opposed to the later. Like anyone who's played through The Machine and Her can tell you the progression. Like the first quest, you just pick up an object from a container, and then you go put objects into containers, and from there it just rapidly sort of, I want to say evolves, but maybe it's devolves. I don't know. But like the quest design gets much more like in depth and complicated as you go because I was learning how to do it as I went, and I, I I did go back and kind of clean up a lot of that earlier stuff because there were like the even just as simple as picking up an object from a container, I had that done all wrong, and it did take a while to kind of learn enough to fix that, to go back and fix that. But I was at least able to do that. But I do think it's been cool to, I've been a Sim Settlements fan for a long time. It's been cool to see all of the evolution in terms of like what it started out as and what we're working towards now. I think that's just really neat, and I kind of like, hopefully people who play through the project that I made, the mod that I made, kind of see that progression and appreciate that too, because I know I've definitely appreciated that with Sim Settlements, just seeing how it's evolved and changed, and it's just a whole new game in a game to me.
and some of the stuff that you know about that's coming is like It's pretty nuts.
It's
Like we
amazing.
got pretty ambitious.
I'm really excited. I'm excited for the world to see it.
Yeah. So I mean, this is the forever development cycle because we just keep getting more and more ambitious with it. But we'll get there.
We will
I'm
get there.
confident in that much. The thing. So you mentioned something that I've actually been asking a lot of people lately because I've been doing it to myself a lot. Is do you go back when you went back and you were polishing up Machine and Her for final release? Were you tempted to take some of those early quests that are kind of mindless and be like, oh, I could do something so much cooler here? Were you tempted to do that to be like, let's just redo it?
Absolutely. Like, yeah, every time. And in some cases, I kind of did, but in a lot of cases, I really learned all of development. I've never made a mod. I never worked on a game. I never did anything like this before I started this project. And I didn't know enough to know that you should not like cast your VAs and all that like as soon as you finish a quest, even though your project's not done. I was like, all right, cool, scratch that off the list and let's get a VA. And so that made changing anything very, very, very difficult, and in some cases just impossible. And so I tried to optimize what I could to make sure it was reliable and worked correctly. But in terms of like story content, like that's really what hindered me, is that I'd kind of finalized that quote unquote way sooner than I should have. And I learned by the end, by the end sequence in The Machine and Her is very complicated and is a pretty in-depth piece of quest design. And I learned with that like to wait until the absolute last minute to write, to finish the writing, and to make sure the writing kind of wrapped around what I was doing with the quest design, rather than the other way around, because that just wasn't working very well in the early parts of the mod. So yes, I have definitely struggled with that temptation to go back through and change everything around, and in some cases I did give into it, but most of the time I tried to just stick with what I had, just accept it, and just make it better and move on.
It's a tough one to resist because you're not alone when you look back at your stuff and see flaws in it. Like I recently, so I had done my first quests I ever did for Fallout 4. I put into Industrial Revolution, the expansion for some settlements, in these things called research buildings, and I recently played through them for my Let's Play series. And the very first one, I was like in my head, I remembered these being really awesome. And then the first one, most of it is either you're like putting stuff into a container or you're waiting 24 hours. And like at one point in the quest, like you have to wait 4 different times. You get a quest objective each time and you go read a terminal entry and then wait again. I was like, that is terrible. And then like they just get more and more complex with each one. But it was like I had the same problem. So you're definitely not alone there. And I think I bet you can probably trace it through all of Bethesda's developers too. If you go look through. So if someone were to tell you who designed a set, like each quest in the game, you could probably be like, oh, I bet they did this one first, then this one, this one, because I think that even they go through that of like as they're growing and getting better at it, they just keep adding more and more complicated things.
Well, and I think quest design itself is sort of an underrated skill in terms of like just the developer world. It's not really something that a lot of people talk about. I think it historically has been left up to like programmers or writers who aren't familiar with the game tools, so there's this like weird in-between area that like a lot of quest design kind of falls short, or I think it feels kind of flat, and not just in Bethesda games but in just games in general where you have to go do something. I've heard lots of complaints, especially side quests, fetch quests, talk, fetch, kill, like you hear about that a lot, and I think that's just kind of a byproduct of that. It's this weird skill that is very hard to learn unless you're just doing it, and that's the only way I could figure it out, was just doing it, and screwing it up and trying to not screw it up so much.
Oh, you touched on so many things there I want to talk about.
Sorry.
So no, that's all right. That's good. We got a lot of branches we can go in this conversation. In fact, I just took some notes because I'm coming back to this. So the thing with modern games, and I don't know how to break this, about the feeling like quests always fall into one of those categories. It's talk, it's kill, it's fetch. It's always about something, and I think part of this is that you have to be able to gamify it. Like in order to there to be an objective that the game can react to, there has to be something distinct that you're doing. And I think it's just we've all gamed so much that we've just recognized them as patterns. And there's this weird human thing where as soon as you identify a pattern, you like feel above it, and then you're just like, oh well, that's crap. Even though it's like, well, that's what we have available. Like, Just because you understand that there are only X amount of story types doesn't mean you should just dismiss all stories. Like,
Right.
it's unfortunate, but I think so. I think what ends up being the best is basically it's whatever game can disguise the fact that that's what you're doing. Like the game that can
Yes.
make you forget that you're killing 7 bad guys as your quest. Like that's kind of the I think the benchmark we subconsciously use. So if you can just make the player forget that they're doing one of the the only 4 or 5 types of quest available,
Right.
that they'll be happier.
I feel like I've had that kind of a similar conversation with my writer friends about plot holes. Like, that's a big thing that some writers really care about plot holes and they want to fill all their plot holes. And I just kind of think to myself, like, and it's just my own personal thoughts on it, but I just feel like people only look for plot holes when they're bored, like when you've kind of already lost them. And I feel like that's the same thing, like with what you're talking about. Like when people are awoken from that kind of dream state of playing and they recognize the patterns, I think it only really bothers them if they're bored. Like if they're already not engaged in the story or the gameplay is failing them somehow. I think if they're really engaged in that, people kind of let it go. Yeah, but you have to keep them engaged. So whether it's gameplay or story or hopefully both, I think if they're really engaged on that many levels, they'll be okay with the fact that you're having to go fetch a thing, or kill somebody. And
Yeah.
when you say disguise it, I think that's honestly, I think to me that is how you disguise it. Like just make sure the stakes are good, the narrative stakes make sense, and that you're not. That the design isn't just purely just go do this one thing. I think there should be some surprises along the way. Hopefully, some twists and unexpected decisions. I think those things really do the most to disguise these very few options that seem to be available to us as designers.
Yeah, that's something that I think we could do better in on some Settlements team with our quest design. Is sometimes we still fall into the trap a lot of go collect X or Y and then there's nothing that happens there,
Yeah.
and I think that having a moment happen there is probably a pretty big thing to do, just to make sure that it's interesting the whole way, and that again you make players forget about the fact that they were the measurable objective was to collect the thing.
Right.
They're going to remember that moment where they got jump scared or where they found a dead character and had a meaningful holotape that you got to listen to.
Yeah.
Like, because everybody, we all hated on 76 for spamming us with holotapes. I remember them being a pleasure in Fallout 4 because they were rare. It was like, there was just a few dozen of them throughout the game.
Yeah.
So then when I found them, I was like, oh, this is really cool. A glimpse into the past world. It was only when they got spammed on me that I hated them. But
Right.
those were a great little thing that they could add along the way. So you're going to collect some MacGuffin for some character, and then you find a little vignette of like what had happened to somebody. You get to hear a holotape about their life, and all of a sudden it was like, okay, well that's what you remember, not the fact that you had to go fetch some stupid thing for somebody that could have done it themselves.
Right.
It was like, oh, I got to go explore a new area. I got to learn about this woman who lost her child, etc. And that's all great stuff. And I don't think we do enough of that on some of the stuff we've been developing in quest work.
I mean, I think it's tough. It's hard to do that. Like you have to kind of, in my experience, like you just have to plan ahead and really imagine that moment of player surprise. Like I think you kind of have to work around that to have that execute and come together. Because it's one of those things that I think most players can kind of tell if it's shoehorned in at the end. Like, oh, we have to add a twist here, or we have to, But it's something that I think if it's planned for kind of from the start, it becomes a little easier to build around that in terms of level design and set dressing and even just dialogue. You can kind of hint towards things. I think narratively it's pretty rewarding as a player when I only recognize in hindsight that something was hinted to me or that something was sort of foreshadowed.
Right, yeah.
I didn't notice it at the time, but in retrospect, I'm like, oh man, that's what that was. Wow. And those are my favorite moments in games by far.
Yeah, I think that's when you you basically make the player feel clever. I think this is a thing that writers talk about for movies.
Yeah.
Is you want to set up those moments where the watcher can feel like only they put that connection together, that it was earlier in the movie, even though it was clearly set that way for them.
Yep.
And I think we want that in games too.
Absolutely. I think people they criticize that, just the connection. Games aren't movies, and they're not. That's very true. But when we're
Yeah.
talking about narrative, I mean, people have been conditioned to want these very certain things ever since I think books were written, thousands of years ago.
Right.
And so I think we are kind of limited by that, but there's also a lot of untapped potential in games to really run with some of that stuff and put new twists on it. So I would love to see more of that from games. I've had some of my favorite, like most beloved narrative moments of any medium have come from games, and it's exactly like you said. It's because I felt clever, like I was in on the joke, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that's an awesome feeling.
I agree with that. I've had some moments in games that like shook me to my core,
Yes.
where I was just like, wow, I never thought about that thing. Like I remember the ending to Bioshock Infinite, just like
I was just thinking
like,
about that one.
like I was like I probably spent an hour then researching quantum mechanics after that, because I'm like I know that this is fantasy and it's not all completely based in reality, but just some of the questions it brought up, it was like, whoa.
I just
Yeah, fantastic. And I don't think I would have had the same reaction if that was in a movie. I think the way they delivered in the game, where you felt like your actions were driving things toward that conclusion,
Yep.
just made it all the more impactful.
Yeah, I remember like exactly that feeling. I mean, I couldn't research quantum physics. I knew that was kind of going to be a lost cause, but I just remember turning off my TV and just kind of staring at it, turned off for like maybe 30 minutes, just thinking and thinking and thinking, and just feeling that impact of the story. And that was actually one of the moments, that and the end of Mass Effect 2, just really made me just sit there and think like, man, I want to do this, or I want to try to do this. I want to see if I can give this feeling to other people. That feeling of sitting there trying to just get your head around what you just saw, and not just saw, but participated in.
Yeah.
And I think that's an awesome, awesome feeling. And it is unique to games that we can give people that.
Yeah, there are a lot of unique things to games. There's something else I want to talk about, but you brought up Mass Effect 2, so now I'm distracted.
Sorry.
The ending to Mass Effect 2, no, it's okay. I'm just playing. The end of Mass Effect 2, I loved how much player choice resulted in the ending right
Yes.
within that quest, where you got to see immediate feedback of your actions and decisions. And I remember like that stuck with me for a long time, about like the characters that I lost, where I'm like, I loved that
know,
guy.
yeah.
I can't believe I lost him.
Like, I hated
And that was awesome. But then I went and played Dragon Age Inquisition, and there's a similar scene at the end of that game where you think that that's going to happen. And for me, I lost 0 characters. The whole battle was easy, and I was like, what? They didn't do the Mass Effect 2 thing? And I think what it was is they probably got complaints from people from Mass Effect 2 that it was too hard to keep all your characters alive, and so they dumbed it down. That's my assumption.
I think, yeah, I remember I had that exact same like kind of playthrough. I thought it was too simple. I really appreciated, and I know this is just a personal style for me as a gamer, but in Mass Effect 2, I appreciated that you have to know the characters to know where to assign them, like what they would be good at doing. And I
Right.
thought that was awesome. You had to have their loyalty, you had to do their missions, and you just had to know who they were, to really pull that off. And I could see a lot of gamers feeling kind of cheated, like, I lost this character that I don't think I should have. But that to me just raised the stakes through the roof. Like, for the third game, I remember when I started out, I was like, I've already lost 2 people and I don't want to lose anymore. I was very worried about that, and I played very like much with that in the back of my head, those character deaths. So I think that was the right call. I don't know if they succumbed to pressure, if BioWare, if that's what happened, but I do remember being kind of let down in that by Inquisition. Same feeling.
Yeah, this is something I'm not sure which way they should be going, and I think that I don't know which way they should go, as far as there's always a problem of when you start to try it, once you bring money into the equation, there's the temptation to use money as your maxim to decide whether you're doing well or not.
Right.
Of like, do we continue to go for a broader and broader audience, which is naturally going to require you to dumb down the product so that it appeals to as many people as possible, and eventually, I think most games and franchises and movie franchises all try to do this until they jump the shark and start losing money,
Right.
and then they'll try and bring it back. And it's like that. It's like kind of that. Like you see, there's a lot of musicians with I think they call it, like, was it the sophomore slump, where
Oh,
basically
yeah.
they basically don't understand what the magic was in their own first product, so then they can't reproduce it, so they try something new. Where I don't see that as much in like big games and franchises, like with like Fallout, for example. It seems to me more like, rather than them not understanding the magic, they're just trying to widen the net
Yeah.
and losing some of the magic in the process, because they have to cut some things in order to appeal to more people?
I always get the sense that, like, I remember my dad told me this, and I remember this very clearly, like, because music runs in my family, and we've all been musicians, and um, I remember asking him about that, the sophomore slump, and he said that, well, you have your whole life to write your first album. And I thought that was really interesting. Like that kind of explained a lot of it to me. And I don't know if that applies as much to games because obviously you don't spend your whole life making a game. But I do get the sense that a lot of those first projects is someone's passion, and they've had a lot of time to think about it and plan it. And someone on the team, I'm assuming, did all that and had
Right.
that drive. And then yeah. And if they got lucky enough to get it funded and all that stuff, now you have a sequel and a follow-up and expectations and there's
Yes.
so much less time to get ready for all that and to be as passionate maybe as this the first game. I don't know if that's really how it works, but you said sophomore
Well, that
slump, and that's
definitely
always what I think of is that story from my
that
dad.
definitely makes sense. That
Uh,
definitely makes sense that you would have all these ideas brewing, all these life experiences to draw from, that you could pull in the most impactful pieces
Right.
from into the first one, but then you've already used those up. So then the second one,
Yeah.
like it's gonna be pretty obvious if you just go right back to the well. So you
Right.
got to shake it up a little bit.
I,
Yeah,
I
yeah, that
just
makes
tell
sense there.
people just go, I don't know, go to Europe or go do something crazy. Try to have another life, really quickly. Try to have a second life really quickly so you can draw from new experiences. I don't know if that would really
Well,
work.
maybe that's why pop stars all go through crazy breakdowns.
Honestly, I wonder sometimes. I really do.
The yeah, but so the game thing with the widening, I don't know what the right answer is because at one point you do want to see these franchises make more money because it means they're going to be able to do more epic things and get better, more polished experiences. But if it's to sacrifice gameplay, then it feels not worth it. And so
Right.
I think it's also there's also the depending on which audience you're aiming for, it changes the feel and scope of the game dramatically. Like one of the big things I've noticed as I've gotten older is how much less time I have to game. So I need my experiences to be more concise. Whereas when I was younger, if a game didn't last 100 hours, I was disappointed. And now
Right.
it's like if a game lasts more than 20, I'm like, oh, are you kidding me?
Yeah, who has time for this? Yeah.
Right, which is ironic considering the Some Settlements is designed to like make the game last thousands of hours.
Right. I'm like, well, also ironic because we spend all our time like doing this now, like making this stuff now. It's like
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, I just messaged somebody earlier today saying like sometimes I wonder if we're creating soul-sucking evil with games.
Well, no, because we're not doing
Because-
microtransactions and all the other
That's true, but, like-
the industry boogeymen.
I don't know. I know. Well, we know the microtransactions aren't going anywhere. I mean, unless
Yeah.
they're made illegal or something. But those are kind of here to stay, unfortunately. But there are also stuff like modding. And the thing I mentioned earlier about that we're in this weird space where like the tools are super easy to use and there's a lot of talented people with idle time that we're effectively competing for people's attention just like every other medium.
Yeah.
And so the closer we get to parity with them, the less successful those things are going to be, so that then they might start going away, which could be cool.
That's actually
And I'm not to say that us modders are going to like just be the cause of that, but I'm saying it's got to have a minor impact. And then like other it's as more projects go toward just the economics of it, of like I'm willing to accept less money to do the same thing, of that eventually you're going to have enough, somebody's going to create a Fortnite killer that doesn't have microtransactions, and then that could be a draw to people.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point, especially in terms of sheer numbers, like you said, of people who do have the time, if they just get the skills in order and can get organized. There is, I think, in terms of comparing that, sorry, to AAA studios. I think just in sheer numbers and the output that a group like that could create, I think would steal some. I don't know if the mind share is the right word, but just some audience away for sure.
Yeah. I don't know how much of an impact it'll have, but it's got to be. I think if nothing else, it'll just force the industry to get to do more crazy and bigger things that aren't possible to do on a smaller scale. Like I think you were already starting to see some of that with when you see games like what was the one Rockstar just put out, the what can't I think of the name? Red Dead Redemption 2,
Oh yeah.
where it's so polished and so detailed at every level that it's like this is and they, you look at the size, you hear about the size of their team, the overtime they worked. It's like, this is not repeatable.
No.
Like, this is not realistically repeatable.
Yeah.
And so then the only way to organize and pull off something like that is with piles and piles of money. And it's still fun to see once in a while. Like, that was a freaking glorious masterpiece to behold. But do we need that? Do we need every game to be that? Probably not. And it wouldn't have happened without copious amounts of money drawn in by microtransactions through GTA 5.
Yep, absolutely. I think, they would never have been able to afford the sheer number of people and hours, like you said, that went into making that, this I don't want to say overcrafted, but just meticulously handcrafted.
Sometimes the things seemed overcrafted. It's like, do I really have to clean my body?
Yeah, I was like, that's exactly what one of my friends said. She said, I don't want to bathe the man right now. Like, I just, like, I have to take a shower. I don't have time for this. Like, I thought that was pretty great. Like, but
so in one sense, I kind of want to see the companies make a lot of money to see what can be done. But then we tying it back to my whole point of bringing this up was that eventually the tools catch up to where you can do pretty crazy stuff with minimal skills because we've got computer technology. So eventually stuff like that advanced will become more commonplace, and we won't need to have so much money involved. And I think that's kind of where mods are at right now, is we're in a place where we can build things that are pretty close to the same quality as the original product, and we don't have to charge people for it.
Right. And I'm hopeful that people, like, that our players can see that too. That, like, the quality is getting real close, and and it's free, and it's something that can kind of, and I think Bethesda knows that too, that it brings in more players, it adds to the longevity. There's always this fear of, paid mods, and they're going to get rid of modding, and I would be very surprised, just personally. Like, I think that's a huge draw for them, and I think they know that too. So.
Yeah, it's definitely at odds with their current business model. Like, the fact that they haven't done, like, obviously if they released modding for 76, it would cut their Atom Store sales, no question. Like, there's just no way it wouldn't. Especially because and maybe I'm wrong in this. I don't have the numbers to back this up, but from what I've seen of just numbers of gamers in general, is that PC is on the rise and is one of the dominant forms in the market, with only being beat out by mobile currently. And so since PC players would have access to the mods, like, we can't guarantee that Xbox would have access to them again, like it does with Fallout 4, is that you would presume that since 76 is not on mobile, then the majority of their players buying in the Atom Store are probably PC players. And so if they suddenly had mods, which could be much deeper and all free, they're not going to be buying much in the Atom Store. And that's obviously a problem for them.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, something that's a legitimate a thing to be concerned with. And then Creation Club, I think a lot of people hate that because of that same idea of the fact that they're effectively hiring modders and sending up a flag that, hey, you know what, in the future we're probably not going to be putting out mod support because we can sell you mods instead. I think, like you said, I don't think that's realistic, but I definitely could see, and this is actually a conversation I haven't had in many months, but I could definitely see them delaying the release of tools for modders in future titles, just to make sure they get a chance to capitalize on
get all that money. Yeah. That I could see. Yeah, I know that like, there was a little bit of a wait from Fallout 4 to the release of the CK. I want to say it was like 8 months. Like, is that?
Yeah, it was quite a long time compared to what they've done in the past.
And that maybe that was for technical reasons. Like, I don't know the story behind that. But
yeah.
But no, I could definitely see that. And I'll be honest, I kind of and I'll come out here as a Fallout 76 player. Like, sometimes I do actually play it, but I completely forgot about it when I was talking just now about the whole mod thing. I was like, yeah, that's right. Actually, that would kind of undermine their whole business model as it is right now.
Yeah.
But I do, like, in the morning I get up and I play like 30 minutes of Fallout 76, and so I probably shouldn't tell anyone that. It makes me, like, like, less than, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. I wanted to like the game just because I like the idea of modding a multiplayer game, and I just adore the Fallout franchise, but the game that was, to me, as an example of Bethesda trying to of like forgetting what the magic of their own games was.
Absolutely. I think it's like incredible to me that it runs at all. I don't know how they did that. Honestly, I really don't. But Yeah, I do think it took it a lot of the core strengths of the Fallout franchise and even their own previous entries in it and just dropped all of it, which is really a shame.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens in. I think it's next. Is it next October or November? They're dropping the big NPC update.
Yep.
So we'll see what they do with that.
Yeah.
Because in my head, I've convinced myself that all it's going to be is like a little human village and a little raider village, and you pit them against each other.
Right.
When in reality, what it would need to be, I think, to recapture those of us who it would need like multiple major hub cities and random NPCs you could stumble on with quests for you and interesting experiences. And I'm concerned with, I mean, like now we've just been talking about how much time it takes to do quest work.
Yeah.
Can they pull that off in 10 months? Like, is that feasible? Or even a year if we assume they started right at the end of the development of the release version?
Well, I honestly, that is something I am almost more fascinated in the game space right now than anything else to see how they're going to do that. Because you talked about doing scene work and stuff in settlements, like and how challenging that has been. And I'm like, God, what happens when another player comes and shoots your quest giver? Like right as they're about to give you the quest, like, or what if you're in the middle of the quest and they kill the person you need to talk to complete your quest, like, or they just keep shooting them over and over again. Like, I don't know how that's going to work, how they're going to handle all of that. I'm very interested to see.
My assumption is it's going to be I think they're going to instance it, and then, or it'll be that the NPCs just don't react to bullets. They'll just be like,
just if
any player shoots them, like the bullet goes through them. Or does like I think I'm trying to. It's been so long since I played World of Warcraft, but I'm pretty sure like you could hit NPCs all you want, and like the effect would hit them like as far as visually, but the NPC would not flinch, wouldn't move, wouldn't acknowledge it. And it'll be something like that. Like it will be because like the game's already 76 has already killed off its immersion with the crazy floaty Vault Boy bubbles over everybody's head all the time. So like it's not like you really can claim that you're preserving immersion by letting them get hit. Because I could see that being the argument in the initial pitch of like, well, we can't have NPCs because what happens when someone nukes them all and they survive? That'll be unrealistic. There's no realism in that game.
That's true. That's true. I don't think that's necessarily a design spec for them at this point.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they handle that. It'll be really interesting to see because they've said multiple times they know mods are important to their games. They want to get them out eventually. So then it'll be interesting to see what does a quest look like in multiplayer. Like what does it look like in the CK, or is it going to be what we just described of they're just basically each NPC only exists for that player, ignores the other players, which would be a little disappointing because you could there's probably a lot of cool space to play with the multiplayer quest where both players have can direct the dialogue in some way.
Yeah, like I've never seen anything like that. That would be really interesting if they tried it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see.
We'll have to wait and find out. Yeah, well, first we got to see how do they do with NPCs in multiplayer.
Yep.
When do they release a creation kit, if at all? It might be one of those things where it's like, all right, well, the game's down to 4 players, so go ahead and release the tools.
Why not? What can it hurt now?
Right. Yeah, I don't know what they're going to do about that. I don't know how much the Atom Store is driving things, like how much money it's pulling in, how much are they dependent on it, and I mean all that's going to probably factor into when they release mods. And that's again, it's disappointing from the perspective of if they do it with this game, they're probably going to keep doing it with every game of like keeping microtransactions in the business model and deciding when mods come out rather than just being like, you know what, the modders add a lot of value to the game, like let's just get these tools out ASAP.
I mean, I think of how many times I bought Skyrim, like for different platforms, and I'm like the only reason is because of mods. Like I bought it on my old crusty 360 before, and that's how I first played Skyrim. And then I got a computer that can play games, and I did it on there. And then second edition came out, and I got that too, and or the special edition, not second edition.
Special edition, yeah.
Yeah, and I bought that too, and I think I bought it again for the Xbox One just because my computer was pretty much a development thing now, and it doesn't really play games anymore. So and that was all because of mods. So I hope they keep that in their blood. I hope they keep that there.
Yeah, I would hope so too. To me, it seems like in an excessively competitive market where people are pushing the envelope and doing things like Rockstar did with Red Dead, is that Bethesda's in a position where modding could become their unique value added that doesn't cost them anything. Like it costs them microtransaction money, but if they let go of that idea and be like, all right, a lot of the people There are a ton of people out there who will not pay for microtransactions on principle. They just hate them. They think they're garbage. They're not going to touch them. To those people, this is a value add that nobody else can do, because nobody else has had more than a decade now of people committing themselves to learning our engine and designing stuff for it and giving it away for free.
Yeah.
Like, that's such a huge thing.
But like I said, I think that's entirely unique to Bethesda, and if they lost that, I don't know. I think that would be very heartbreaking to me.
Yeah, I agree. That would really be a bummer, because that's always like I tend to do my first playthrough of their games unmodded, and then after that, not a chance in hell I'm touching their games again without mods installed.
Yep.
So I wouldn't go back. And like, even going back, even if it's like, if you look at something like I think Creation Club to me just didn't go far enough. I think Creation Club is too microtransaction-y. I think if instead it was like things like yours, if they did something the size of Machine in Her every 6 months, like here's a new little mini DLC, like people would go nuts for it. It would be, they could sell one of those every 6 months, no question. I'll give them $20 every 6 months if they put out one of those. Like,
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to see from it, and it didn't happen. And that to me is where they could have best of both worlds. You could still release, let the modders go nuts, keep them interested in your game, and then you could still, touch base once in a while and milk us for a little more money.
I was really surprised that they exactly about that they didn't do. It seems like it's mostly weapon skins and things like that, and yeah, that just seems kind of okay.
Yeah, it seems like a lost move. But maybe that'll be something they'll be cognizant of for the next game. I'm sure that part of what complicates it is the voiced player player character. If they want to add new quests, they suddenly have to like call up these voice actors, and then not only that, but their game is in 20 languages. So now then they got to call up the translators for those characters every time. Like, it's probably just
everything. Yep.
Yeah, it's probably just not feasible to do it. Like, the scope of that is like, I'm sure. I mean, it's always feasible if there's enough money, but maybe it was like wasn't worth the risk, because they're just like, man, we would have to. It would cost us so much more to get this production all fired back up.
That entire workflow, of just having the VA come in and, like you said, the localization of all of it, and that would I could see them not being super excited or in a rush to go back to having to do that. And that was like the player voice, like that was something that I really did try to accommodate the first few months of development, and I just realized I couldn't write a different story with someone else's words. Not to the extent, like, this is a pretty different story that I was writing, and there just wasn't any way to do it, and I wish there had been, but I try to be upfront with people. There's no player voice in this. Sorry, but I think that
almost nobody is doing player voice. We are masochists on the Sim Settlements team. We insist everything has to be player voiced. And so I'm sure that's a new challenge for you, because you are on the team that's dealing with. This is a perfect segue back to some of the notes I put down. So one of the things that you had to do on your project that you're now getting to deal with on the Sim Settlements, because we're doing story stuff now to teach our gameplay mechanics, is the fact that we have to shoehorn the existing player dialogue into things. But one of the things that happens throughout the development, and you described exactly the problem of, you'll start developing out something, you had it all out on paper, and then you get to a point when you play it in the game and it doesn't feel right. A detail comes up from the playtesters that's very important that it gets dealt with, and it's a real struggle and real challenge to not only, it's already a challenge to have to rewrite your own characters to fix that problem, but then we also then have to deal with the player voice limitations. So we've like increased our workload by quite a bit.
Yes.
Given all your work on Machine and Her, and then leading up into your work on the next Sim Settlements expansion, we have had to deal with a lot of rewriting and stuff. And have you found some like tricks to help you get through that, so you don't end up in that space as much? Because it's a big problem, especially when you have the voice actors involved early, like you did.
Yeah. Honestly, like, that was another kind of like everything else I've just learned as I went. And what I finally kind of settled on was that I just had to keep in focus the whole time, like, what's the core conflict of this scene, like, or of this quest, like, what ultimately am I trying to say? Because then when a particular detail doesn't work out, or something doesn't play the way I thought it would, the way I had written it, like, it's usually, I can still keep that original goal, that original conflict in mind. So even if I'm doing rewrites, I'm not having to drastically, just cut up everything. And I found that the only way that works is if that original core conflict is very strong. If it's kind of, if I'm not real sure what it is, or I, in my early days, I was like, oh, I'll figure it out as I go. Like that has never worked out very well because then once I do all that work and I get in game and what I did doesn't work out at all, it doesn't play the way I thought it did, then I'm completely lost. I have nothing to go back to. It's like I don't even know what I have anymore. Like I didn't start with a real strong like narrative vision, a real strong core conflict, and now I don't know, like, and I kind of just feel sapped, kind of drained after
Hmm.
that. But if I'm like, okay, here's what I want to do. I want to tell this story, or I want to like establish this conflict between these two characters, or between this character and this entity. If it doesn't work out when I playtest it, I can still come at it again without having to drastically rewrite everything. It's usually just a matter of like a story beat happened at the wrong time, or something I wanted to do with a character just fell really flat. Like I mentioned earlier, a character that I wrote for the next Sim Settlements expansion, that needs to be pacing frantically back and forth and doing all kinds of like manic, frantic motions, and I had to make sure that I could get this character to do that before I finished writing the character because
Right,
if it
right.
looked really bad in game, I was going to rewrite her as being more flat, like having a more flat affect. And to me, that was kind of like the textbook example of like what narrative design is. Is like I had that conflict, I had the story I wanted to tell, but I had to make sure that it was technically feasible within a reasonable amount of time. And if it wasn't, it would have been okay. It wouldn't have required all new player
Right.
dialogue. It wouldn't have required a complete rewrite of the quest. It just would have meant, okay, I have to tweak the player or this character a little bit, so that it matches what's actually happening in the game. And
Yeah.
that was a big part of that process for me. Just for that, that's just as one example. But because I knew what the story was and I knew that what that core conflict was, it would have been okay, if I couldn't quite make the character do what I needed to in game. The rewrite wouldn't have been quite as catastrophic or rippling changes, throughout the rest of the quest,
Yeah,
if that
yeah.
makes any sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's actually there's actually a couple things to unpack there. So the first thing I'm hearing is part of it is as a because you did the crazy thing of being writer, implementer, coder,
Right.
recruiter, director. Like you had all the hats, which is
Yes.
crazy considering the quality of some of the scenes I saw. And that leads to you have to deal with well you were in a good situation there to learn a big lesson, I think, which is you can't get too attached to the specifics.
No.
You have to attach yourself to the overall goal instead
Absolutely.
and be flexible in the specifics, knowing that you've got technical limitations. Something can play out good in your head or on paper,
Yep.
but once you start factoring in all of the open game world elements, it can change things in a big bad way. So it seems like one of the things there, one of the big lessons, and that I know I've had to learn just by, and not directly because I don't do any other writing, is how flexible you've got to be as a
Yes.
writer when you're dealing with games.
Yeah, that like The Machine and Her started out as a short story that I wrote a few years ago, and I actually got a version of it working in the game, and I was all excited, and I went through and played it. And I say play very sarcastically because I realized this isn't a game. This is stupid. Like this, no one's gonna like. It was so bad. Like it worked really well as a short story, and I'd gotten all this great feedback, so I was excited to turn it into a game. And so I got in there and played through what I had made, and it was awful. Like there was nothing for the player to actually do, and nothing translated well in terms of dialogue, and it just killed me. Like it almost killed the whole project right there because I was like, oh well, obviously I don't know what I'm doing. And I got some, and I didn't, that was the truth. I got some really good advice from actually one of my writing mentors who said that you didn't know what you were doing when you first started writing books or short stories either. Like you had to learn, you had to read about that, you had to watch YouTube videos on the art of the thing you're trying to learn how to do. And that was, it was one of those things that I figured, oh, I can write. Like I'm a pretty good writer, I think, so this shouldn't be that difficult. But it was, I've kind of compared it with other people, some friends of mine. It's like painting like easel painting, like just painting right in front of you, and someone says, "Hey, come paint a mural," and I go, "Sure, I can do that. I can paint. How different could that be, from an easel to a mural?" As it
Yeah.
turns out, it's very different, and I read everything I could get my hands on about game writing and what makes it different from just straight up prose writing, and there's a lot of differences. And the key thing, like you said, and this is what reminded me of that, was flexibility. That you absolutely have to be willing to whatever you first. I think I think you pointed this out to me in one of our team chats. You were like, I kept referring to something I'd written as a pre-draft, and it was like, how is this not a first draft? And I'm like, well, because it's not playable yet. Like, to me, it's not a first draft until it's actually playable and in game, and that's your real first draft, not just something that I've written down, because that could be anything. That could be completely not usable at all. And
Yeah.
and I have to be okay with hearing that, and and again, I learned that very much trial by fire with the machine and her, because there was a lot and so much stuff that no one will ever see because it wasn't really any good. Like, it just didn't work.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's just and the only way I think the only reason you were able to learn that is just because you were committed to quality there. You wanted to release something that you could be proud of, that you would actually you would enjoy yourself before you pushed on other people.
Right.
Because I think there's the temptation when you're working alone is to just do everything absolutely how you want to. I definitely go through that. I have too much power on the team as is, and so like I can just make things go the way I want. But one of the other ways I think to learn the lesson is just when you start collaborating, you're like, right, well, I can't be rigid, because
Right.
if it's only my ideas we're doing, that nobody's going to care
Yep.
other than me.
Yep.
And like and so like that is another way to learn that lesson. But it pays out so well in game development, because there's so many other things going on. Like the player is a constant like variable in
Yes.
your equation, like preventing you from ever getting too rigid anyway. So it's like an awesome lesson to learn, to be like, all right, we have to be flexible in everything. Like anything we create, anything like we write down. I know like a lot of writers can't handle criticism because
Yeah.
like they're very, very attached to every word they put on the page. And that's I think with gaming, like like in game development, there's no room for getting rigid.
No. Well, I think a lot of writers come at it from, the perspective that I originally did have, which was like, in the world of novels and short stories, like it is just your words on the page. That's it. And you may have an editor, and honestly, it's been valuable experience for me to have an editor who looks over my shoulder and says, "Hey, that's crap. You have to get rid of that." Like, so I'd heard that before, and it wasn't a brand new thing for me to experience the feeling of, "Oh, I don't think what I wrote is the best thing ever here." But I will be honest. I'll confess that over the last couple of months, as I've gotten closer to releasing this project, it really started to occur to me that, having been other than the voice actors, no one had really seen this except the clip I showed you, and the clip I showed Fallout Cascadia before I joined them. Other than that, no one had really seen any of this work, and it occurred to me, I was like, I think this is good, but like, I honestly don't know. Like, because I cut out so much that I thought wasn't good, and left what I thought was, but it was like, God, actually, like, no one has looked over. I don't have an editor for this, and
Yeah.
I did get a boost. I think I mentioned this to you. There was a voice actor that I worked with that I really admire that said, I will read any role you write for me. Like, and that was a very like big compliment, and that gave me some confidence that, like, okay, like, I don't think this is a total train wreck.
Nice. Yeah.
So, but I did get scared over the last couple months that maybe this, was going to fall completely flat, because I hadn't been collaborating with a bunch of other people. And I do think that, like you mentioned, that is a great reminder of, that this is a team, and, something has to work in the narrative sense, but it's also got to work for the assets people. It's got to work for the implementers. It's got to work for, the gameplay, like whatever the gameplay
Yeah.
needs to do. And yeah, that's a really good experience, like to be on those teams and have that kind of check and balance system, so to speak.
And is that what was it that motivated you? So before, just a little history. So before Nika joined the Sim Settlements team, which was, I think you joined like within a few weeks after we released Conqueror. We put out Conqueror was almost like a attempt for us to get more meat in the door. We need more people on the team. Like, let's release something cool. Yeah, not to refer to you as meat, but all us humans are meat in that sense. But you, before that, you had worked on Cascadia for a little while in a similar role, dealing with the narrative fun that is implementation. And what inspired you to join teams? Obviously, you hadn't released your mod yet. Did you need a break from your own project? Because I've definitely been there. Did you want to experience working on this in a team environment? What was it that drew you to move beyond running things solo? Because there's like that power trip of being able to decide how to do everything is pretty cool.
Yeah, like and I'll be very honest and candid and say, like, when I first joined on with Cascadia, like I wasn't really prepared for that 100%. Like I didn't have that mindset right out of the gate, and I struggled with that for a little bit because it was like, well, let's get moving, come on, like let's just make a decision and do it. And that's not how it works on big teams, of course. And so that was something that was an adjustment period. But a big part of that was, you said, the motivation to join a team was because, like, it occurred to me even then, I was like, I think I need to like do this stuff in an environment where other people are watching me work, and make sure I know what I'm doing, and make sure that I'm not missing really obvious things. And I think that, and in that regard, the experience at Cascadia was invaluable. Just seeing how the rest of the team operated, and like the ins and outs of the kind of daily life of being on a big team like that was very informative. And it kind of gave me a taste for it, and I think what prompted me to reach out to you about I think I sent you that little scene that I had made, and I saw the Conqueror stuff. That is exactly actually what it was. And there was some teaser about, I can't remember exactly what it was now. It's been so long. But I was like, oh, I could see that Sim Settlements was moving in this more narrative direction, and I was like, I think I would love doing that. I think I would love being a part of that, and I think I could take what I had learned at Cascadia and kind of help apply it, because I know that I also know from experience from my own project and from Cascadia that's hard. That narrative stuff is very difficult. It's a lot harder than it looks like it should be. It looks like it should be the simpler of the many jobs on a team, but it's tough. It's much harder than it seems like it would be.
Well, and it's also a soul crushing job, because you have to tell a lot of people that their ideas are unfeasible. I have to do the same thing. Like when people ask, bring me cool ideas, and I'm like, yes, that's amazing. Let's do that, except we can't because it's not possible in Fallout 4.
Yes, and I hate that. I really, I've definitely, been the boogeyman in that regard, and I hate doing it. I really do. It's just been one of those things that, like, we have to keep the player experience kind of at the forefront, and I admire and respect, like, the passion. Like, I want to tell this story. Like, I'm like, yes, that's what we need, because that's how you get a writer to start and finish something. They have to be passionate about it, but it's got to work for the game. It's got to work in that overall picture, that big picture, and that, especially with narrative design, I found that a lot of that is going back and forth between writers and people of other departments, kind of making sure that everyone's making the same game, and that we're all on the same page, and speaking at least a little bit of each department's language is a big part of that. And it is oftentimes kind of having to say, well, let's look at it from this angle, or let's take a step back, and make sure that we can do all this stuff. So yeah.
And some of it involves you actually have to just get in there and try something in the engine and hope it works before you overcommit on time to it. And unfortunately, like, I know we had that early on, as you implemented a bunch of things, and then it was like, oh, this is not playing well. Guys, we need to take a look at this. And then it involved a ton of rewrites, and like that happens. I think one of the things that's interesting with doing the narrative stuff on the Sim Settlement stuff is ultimately, like, we want a narrative there we're trying to do something that doesn't get done often in the types of games that Sim Settlements is. So Sim Settlements is kind of like in simulation games, you generally would have like scenarios that were, like the closest I can think of that would try to do a good story would be something like Warcraft 3 or StarCraft. But those are the exception as opposed to the rule. Most of them, you get like the silly FMV from the Command and Conquer games. I know some people love those stories. I always thought they were ridiculous. Or you get like the no story of games like Civilization, where it's just the story is just kind of evolves as you go, where you get Gandhi attacking you with nukes, like just like stuff like that evolves during the gameplay. And so I've been trying to lean us more toward the Blizzard angle of having simultaneously a very interesting story, but its purpose ultimately is to teach you how to play the game.
Right.
Because that to me is the final step to bridge the feel of a mod to the feel of a game, is that you've actually got a way to carefully introduce players to complex systems without overwhelming them and keeping them engaged the whole time. And it's very, very tough to do. Like, I got mad respect now for game developers after how much time we've put in. Like, we're on month 11 or 12 of Conqueror development now, and we still are not done teaching the game mechanics or finishing up what our little story to start us out. And it's like and like then so the next thing we're trying to do is even bigger. Like it's a lot. Yeah. And then so you're doing that outside, and then that ends up causing all sorts of problems with the writing and the narrative stuff too, because I, just like you mentioned with Machine Her, you had some stuff that you looked back at and you're like, that's just not fun enough. That's just distracting. I need to cut it. I need to streamline this experience. I do the same thing with some Settlements development all the time. I will build some big exotic system, and then I'll give it to the testers, and they'll be like, "This doesn't work. This doesn't work. This doesn't work." Or they'll ask me why this doesn't work a certain way, and I'm like, "I don't know. I just thought it might be cool." And then so I have to like tear down all this stuff. And in the meantime, if I already told the writing team about it, they've already worked it into the narrative, and it's like, actually, we got to cut that whole gameplay system. It's not fun, or it doesn't work. And like, so like that can cause problems pretty much up to the 0 hour, and that's obviously like, so then we have got to work around that. So it adds extra complications to the writing and narrative stuff for Sim Settlements.
It does, and that's something that every, the teams I've been on and the people that I've talked to, kind of talking shop about narrative design in general, is like, you as much as possible, and it's not always very, very possible, but as much as possible, you want to start with that really strong vision that, with what this game is and what we're trying to do, because the development process is just going to brutalize all of that, like by itself. Like, even if everything goes according to plan, it's just going to all fall apart. And that's one of those things that it is, like you said, it's a domino effect. One little change to a gameplay mechanic then blows up a whole part of the narrative. Or, if one part of the narrative is kind of falling flat, it has to be reworked because a gameplay mechanic depends on that part of the narrative being present. And so it is just this kind of ongoing back and forth. And I think that when you mentioned flexibility, I think that's a huge element of it from anyone on a narrative team, is just gameplay is first, unfortunately. For writers that's hard to hear, but it's the truth. Everything has to serve the gameplay. And I think that's the skill of a writer can really be tested like that, because you're not used to having to answer to, if I want to make it rain in a book, I can just make it it's raining now. If I want I want this character to be on the opposite side of the room, I just write them that way. It's easy. So
well, I think it's one of those things, as you get more experience with it and learn to write around that, you can just create better and better stuff, because you'll have written in advance thinking of that, and then you'll be able to fill in later after all the butchering has been done with the really high, the good dialogue writing, and the make sure you planted the. I think it's almost like you in like programming terms, we would say you learn to abstract better. You learn to like build things out in their concepts as opposed to focusing on the little details.
Right.
And then the little details can they'll fit in anywhere as long as you built that outer structure correctly.
Exactly. I think that's like 100%. Like earlier when I was talking about like that core conflict, I think that's what you mean by like the abstracting, like just have that core center and build around that. And I think, like I don't know if that's kind of the same thing, but it's just like if you build around that solid core conflict in terms of narrative, you really do have a lot more flexibility to change just move pieces around without everything collapsing.
Right. Once you realize that like characters they're more, it's more about their archetype and which part of the hero's journey they're going through, like as like from the narrative standpoint, that becomes the more important parts, and then you can change out character backgrounds, you can change out their dialogue, and then your story will still work.
Right.
And I think that is something we can I think it's something we can appreciate in a Bethesda title when it works, because I think that's one of the other criticisms on top of the or that it gets levied against Bethesda's games often, is that their writing is not the strongest.
Well, I tell people all the time, like I hear that, I've been hearing that over the last couple of days since the mod came out. They're like, oh, this is so much better than Bethesda's writing, and I'm like, honestly, I have nothing but respect for it, and I'm like, because it's way harder than it looks, like especially and I
Absolutely.
and I don't even know at the half of it. I haven't written a game on that scale, like not even close. So like I have no idea the full extent of things you have to account for and that you have to stay flexible for. And I think necessarily, like, the more open that narrative is, like in an open world game, it's just harder to have it be that tight and hit all those emotional beats like people want to have. And so yeah, I my hat is off to anyone that can write on that scale and have it at least work, have it be functional as a story. That it's much harder than it looks. That's all I can tell people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can't even fathom how they approach something like thinking about the main story of Fallout 4 and how it can end in so many different ways. I know it ends in essentially the same way. There's always it involves a nuke. Spoiler alert. But the way that it all weaves together like that, and the fact that there's like the little submissions and how you take out each of the factions, like wrapping my head around how to set that up in the creation kit is like,
Yep.
I don't know.
And that's the thing.
Like not even.
No, I was just saying, like it's functional. It works.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it just works, but like it is function. It's a functional story. It may not be the one everybody wants, but it's easy to write a functional story in a linear format. Like in a short story. But man, it is so not easy to do in an environment like Fallout 4 or any Fallout game or open world game.
Oh yeah. I mean, like in just an example of something we've approached recently, in Conqueror, we had our very first player choice that had like severe impact, where it's gonna have like lasting impact throughout the rest of our story, and like that doubles now the work throughout our main storyline for the rest of it.
Yep.
I mean, not completely doubles, but it does add a whole, like, okay, now this may or may not have happened, and we have to account for that, and it's like almost forks the timeline, and now we have to we're working on 2 games from here out. And like that, the fact that Bethesda did it 4 times in their main game effectively is very impressive. It's that it works, and like there's not like, I haven't taken the time. I'm sure there are holes in it, like you said. There people will poke holes in plots and everything. I haven't bothered to take the time to do that, but from the endings I've played through, they all seem feasible enough within the semi-realistic nature of Fallout 4, and they were enjoyable, and like they were fun to play through. So. Yep. Hats off to them for pulling that off.
That's what I mean. It's functional. You enjoyed it. It's fun enough, and that I know exactly what you're talking about. The alternate timeline thing, like that. That was something like one of my original design specs for the machine and her was like, oh, you can influence Kit, the companion, like in all these different ways, and you still can, but it is drastically scaled down. I'll be honest. Like it's a from where I started, it has been scaled down quite a bit. It was way too ambitious when I started, and I realized, like I'll need 6 different takes of every line, because the Kit can be one of these 6 different ways, and and depending on that, there's also 2 major main quest branches that can happen. There's 2 different. For each of those 2 different quest branches, there's 2 different possible, like, final boss, quote unquote, outcomes, and keeping in mind all of that, all the different ways Kit has been influenced to this point, and her attitude and personality. It's a lot. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff in there that I think if you just looked at it in the CK, it'd be like, oh, that's a lot of duplicate work, but it's all doing something different, and it's because of that player choice. Like you said, just giving the player one choice in Conqueror really added a lot of work.
Yeah. and it's like, and so then when you do those choices, you want them to be high impact because you know
Yes,
the amount of work you're gonna have to put into them.
100%. Yep, that was actually kind of the guiding philosophy for me to start making cuts to the machine in her was like, I don't think this is impactful enough. I don't think enough players are going to see this or be impacted by it.
Right.
So yeah, I think if you, when you do make those decisions, you've just got to make sure that they're going to be felt, that they will
Right.
resonate.
Now this is something I'm just gonna just kind of talk off the top because I haven't really thought this through, so I may go in a weird direction that doesn't make any sense. But
Okay.
I'm thinking that if we tie this back to what we were talking about abstracting out the story, is that when you think about things in those terms, and then you can really see at a high level that there are only so many ways it could go anyway. Like if you've got your main character and your antagonist, and you know their relationship to each other, there's only so many ways you could fork the story where it would actually be different outside of the nuance in the actual words that are spoken or maybe the exact actions you take. The end result, there's only so many end result paths that can result anyway.
Exactly.
So then going to a crazy amount of depth of responding to player choice will just feel flat anyway because a lot of them are going to result in the same thing.
That is, yeah, I think that's spot on. That having that conflict, like you said, the whatever your protagonist essentially is, or your antagonistic force, whether it's a person or an entity, regardless, if you kind of understand that conflict and that relationship, you can really do so much with that in terms of like, okay, I just know where I want to end up. I know where I'd like to end up in this story. And I think it makes the detours a little more accessible during development as long as you know where you want to end up.
Sure.
And again, even then, that will be subject to change, of course. But
Yeah.
I think starting with that is very much ideal when it's possible.
And that's probably how like Bethesda ended up on their focus of it tends to be their RPG and freedom is in how you actually complete each objective as opposed to what the objective is going to be
Right.
is where their variety kicks in. So you can snipe the enemy, you can stealth up behind and shoot and cut their throat. Like you can do the objectives different that way. Obviously, there's not as much in Fallout 4 as far as alternate ways, non-violent ways, or different paths as there might have been in a game like New Vegas. But I think we've had the conversation is like, while everybody glorifies New Vegas, it is not without its horrendous
Yep.
bugs that are only fixed due to community patches. And like something like that increases the amount of work, also increases the likelihood if everything's going to fall apart. And if everything keeps falling apart and 50% of your player base can't experience it in a way that's completable, then it doesn't matter. Like then you might as well have not
It
done
doesn't matter how great the writing was or how many different paths you wrote.
Right.
And like everyone's favorite quest in New Vegas is Beyond the Beef. That's the one that's kind of held up as like the gold standard of choice. And it is also the most notoriously buggy quest in New Vegas. I think for that reason, like because
Yeah.
there are so many alternate paths, and that's wonderful, but that just means there are an exponential number of ways to break it. And
To the point where I remember like when you had said that to I remember when we had this conversation, you said that to me. I'm like, I don't remember it ever breaking, but in reality I think it did break, and I just assumed in my head that was like, oh, that wasn't a valid path I took and the quest ended because of it, because I expected more hardcoreness out of Obsidian because they're the type of game company that will just like let you fail the main quest. They're
Oh,
like,
yeah.
"Well, you screwed yourself." So I think I just assumed that, but it probably was in hindsight just bugs because the quest is overly complicated.
yeah, like I mean, I remember reading about that. Like that's one of the most buggy quests in the whole game, and it makes me sad because I think it's a lot of fun to play through. But I did find myself on subsequent playthroughs just being extra careful, like not to break anything, not to do anything too crazy. And I think at that point I was kind of they had lost me as a player. I was kind of outside the fictional world they set up when I was trying to be delicate with the quest.
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem like the game should be able to handle that type of gameplay. Like the game series now that really really hits well on that is Hitman. The
I haven't played
reboot
that.
they did where it's like a scene. Oh, Hitman is a fantastic series. It went through like a weird place, but where it's at right now is pretty incredible. As far as like having full control over how you want to complete your objectives and everything, and it just the game being very reactive to different things you do, it's really really cool. And I think that Fallout, like in this RPG style, could definitely benefit from that kind of polish that they put on the different choices there, but it still doesn't have. And at the end of the day, in the Hitman, you're playing a hitman, so your goal is to kill somebody. So like the objective doesn't change. Where it gets weird in RPGs is that often we want to be able to kill the person, we want to be able to let them live, we want to be able to side with them, we want to be able to romance them, we want to be able to steal all their money. Like we want to be able to do everything, and it's like that's just crazy. Like I don't know how. Like the high expectations we have of RPGs are so damn high.
It's really damn high, and we want to. I was just thinking you were saying all that, and I was like, we want to be able to do all those things and then kill them if we want to. You know,
right.
It's just,
and then when we're bored, kill them anyway.
And it's just
also they need to be massively important to the main story, but also disposable.
Yes, both at the same time. The narrative should be completable however I want, but it should also evoke emotions in me at the same time. You know, like I think we do have these very high expectations, and I think that's good. You know, I think that hopefully inspires us to aim higher in the development process. But my God, sometimes it's not always feasible to do all these things.
Now, have you seen some of the previews and explanations of Watch Dogs? I don't remember what the subtitle is, but basically Watch Dogs 3?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the new one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is a game that I would have written off, no question, except for the fact that I'm now involved in narrative game design. Because I am so curious if they're going to be able to pull off the impossible of any NPC being able to slot into a storied game and having it have some sort of meaningful impact where I care. I'm so curious if they're able to pull that off, because if they are, they pulled off something I don't think it will have ever been done before.
I have thought that. I have wondered about that. The only reason I'm skeptical is because I got burned before really badly by the first Dishonored game. I don't know if you ever played that.
I did. I didn't go in expecting that from it, though. Was that something?
Well, they had this pre-release feature, that the heart. I can't remember what it's called, but you could hold this heart in your hand, and they talked about how you could go up to any NPC and it would tell you about them. It would give you information about that NPC, and every NPC in the game could be done that way. And the first few hours I played it, I was blown away by that. Like, you would go up to a person and it would tell you about their life. It would, make them seem like this really important person. And then I soon realized that it was just random and that it was repeating a lot of the time. And I think that feature was kind of maybe oversold a little bit, or maybe that's what they planned for it to be, but it wasn't. So that ever since then, I've been kind of wary of every character in the game can be blank statements, If they can pull it off, I agree with you. I think that'll be historic. But that is so much work,
Right.
I would be amazed if they did that, honestly.
Well, I know that they're definitely they have to systemize it. Like, the only way we're ever gonna graduate to a point where every character can be everything, will be when we have AI writing in real time.
Right.
And when we get to that point, we've got so many other problems, philosophically speaking, that gaming should be the last thing on our minds.
Yeah.
But that, obviously, that's the only way we're going to get to a point where we can realistically have these fully open RPGs. At the end of the day, someone has to do the work of writing and it's not just one person. For every hour of entertainment that we get out of a game, it probably took 150 man hours to get to that, if not way more than that. That's probably a super conservative estimate. There's so many hours that go into putting these things together, and even if you ignore if you just assume it's built onto another game, we look at the New Vegas situation and say the engine work was already done, you just have to throw together some level decorations and then do writing and voice acting. If you assumed you stripped it down to that, it's still, think about how many man hours you have into Machine and Her to just get 4 to 5 hours of gameplay out. And we want, as players, we want hundreds of hours.
I just think of that, it was a meme a while ago. I hate to reference a meme, but it was, here's how to draw an owl, and it showed draw a circle and then draw an oval, and then the next frame was, now draw the rest of the effing owl. It was just when you're oh yeah, you have the engine, now just go do everything else. Just draw the rest of the owl. It's I don't think there's any overestimating the amount of work that goes into those things. And you mentioned the AI thing. I remember, and I'm sure everybody listening to this knows about, the big craze for a while has been the procedurally generated worlds. Like that's like the big, or that was going to be the big thing. And I'm not sure if that's still the case anymore. I haven't really followed like industry trends in that regard, but a lot of those things kind of fell flat for people. I'm not sure that even the most advanced AI, especially when it comes to narrative things, will really be able to replicate that feeling of like story momentum and character development. And like it's one of those things that I'd be very curious to see how a machine tries to do that and how close it could ever get.
I think they'll eventually fool us. I don't think
You
we're
think
that
so?
clever. But yeah, I think eventually it'll get to that point.
I disagree. I don't know. I'll take you up on that bet. That's the one. That's the one thing I would.
The reason I think that is because over time, as I study more and more games and like notice the patterns in like films and stuff, I become more and more disenchanted with them because I'm like, oh, that's just this retold.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if we can do that, if we can analyze, some of the best works and find the patterns and stuff, a computer can do it too. So like, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, no, I've told people like if you want to ruin, books, learn how to write. If you want to ruin movies, learn how to, ruin games, learn how to make a game. Like it definitely does change things when you can kind of see the pieces working together.
Absolutely.
But yeah, no, we'll see. I'm curious. I honestly, who knows? I never would have guessed half the stuff that's going on nowadays. So, I could definitely see that happening.
There's all sorts of interesting stuff with the AI on tech and what it'll do. I think video games is one of the places that will benefit before it ever gets to dystopian levels where we have like people creating fake president videos of them declaring nuclear war. Like that'll happen eventually, I'm sure. But I think before then we'll get really cool stuff like dynamically generated voice that would sound convincing. Like I think that is within a decade where we'll be able to, as modders, be able to like type in words for our Fallout 4 player character and have it spit out believable audio from Nate. Like that is going to happen.
See now, I think all my VA friends are readying their comment fingers. That like maybe it's believable, but is it convincing? Like, I think that's
right.
it's one of those, like, or I would say, like, it's realistic sounding, but is it believable or is it convincing? Like, is it a convincing
Well, that's the thing is that it's already, some of the audio that I've heard is already convincing that it came from that person. It's just, like, monotone. Like, it looks like they lack the emotion. So that means if we're already at that point, you give them 10 more years to learn the emotion. I think they can do it.
Well, I am curious. Like, honestly, it would make... it would make my job a lot easier if that does.
It would be a blast as a game producer, like doing to be able to just generate that without having to coordinate with voice actors and stuff.
Yeah.
Definitely sucks for the voice actors, and it definitely takes away a lot of the human element. Like that's one of the things that, because it's actually been a ton of fun to engage with all of the voice actors and like show them like how we've taken what seemed probably like a really dumb script when they're just reading one side and. They have no idea what their character looks like. Yes. They don't know what the gameplay is involved, and then you get to show them the produced thing, and it's really fun to get their reaction and stuff. So I don't want to get rid of that or anything, but at the same time, like you said, when you started your project, you were like in such a hurry to get them cast because it brings so much life. Like when I am doing quest development, even just for the content patches we do for Conqueror. The difference when I spend like weeks lining up all these sequences and everything using robo voice, it's like soul crushing. So I want to get those voices in because getting those in, like I could spend another 2 weeks just listening to the voices and watching them play out because it just completes the whole thing and makes it real.
It does. It makes the hugest difference. And I'm just laughing because like that robo voice, some of my players are still finding that damn thing in my mod just here and there. Honestly, I'm proud of I got rid of most of it, but the robo voice is absolutely soul crushing to hear that, and it doesn't really do the scene justice at all, not even close. And I was talking to somebody that we need to come up with. There's got to be like an audio signature on those that gets generated by the file in the header or something that we can detect, because we got to be able to find a way to just gut those automatically. Like honestly, I'll tell you, like one of the tricks I used to and it mostly worked, honestly, was that I just went to the Fallout, the voice directory in question, for the voice type, and I sorted by date modified, and I just found
Yeah.
all the modified, like if there were similar dates and times and file sizes, I knew those were robo voices, and that was
Yeah.
about the only way I could figure out how to do that, and even then it was not foolproof, as my players will tell you. So that was something that has been a constant struggle. And honestly, I completely sympathize with wanting to, being so sick of the robot voice, like wanting the real VA in there and
Yeah.
needing that, like, not ego boost, but that boost of like confidence, like, hey, this is really good, and I can see that, and the rest of the team can see that. And it was a long 2 years going without really any of that.
Yeah.
It's because even the VAs, which I had owe any success of this project to them, because they brought the parts to life and in a really incredible way. And even I'm sure at some points they were like, "What is this crap? Like, what are you asking me to read? What are you asking me to read here?" Um, and so I'm very grateful for them, and I know what you mean, that it really makes all the difference in a scene. Getting to actually have it be done and seeing the performances play out and come together is it's a really cool feeling.
Yeah. Well, and the other struggle there is that sometimes their performance might make you want to change the direction, and then it's almost
Yep,
too late.
yep, that has
Like,
happened.
it's like, oh my god, they sound so desperate here, and that works, but then that makes the rest of the scene really awkward, so they're gonna have to redo that take.
Well, and I realized, like, I tried to prevent that, like, because that happened to me a few times, and it really messed up a lot of my early development because of that. I would hear something and get excited about it and just run off in that direction. So then I would try to have, like, okay, no, I have a solid, like, directorial vision, so to speak, for this scene. But then I had to learn a whole new language, like talking to VAs and making sure I conveyed to them,
Oh yeah.
like, what I wanted to hear. And I remember Paul Warren, I think, who did the character of Alec for The Machine and Her. Like, he nailed the part absolutely. But I got lucky there. I realized, because when I posted that for an audition, everybody else got it so wrong. They were too mad. They were too because he's kind of one of the bad guys, and they were yelling and shouting, and I'm like, God, that's not what I hear in my head at all. And I realized I didn't really tell them that. Like, I didn't tell them that this is a guy who's used to getting what he wants. Like, it wouldn't even occur to him to shout, really, because he's not angry. He's perfectly in control and calm, but menacing. And that was something that, again, I got lucky with the VA for that part, but I realized after that I had to be a lot more specific. And to be more specific, I had to know what I wanted, out of those VAs, and learn to speak that language. And that was a whole other skill set that I had to pick up as quickly as possible when I was starting to cast people.
Yeah, I have no idea how to even approach that. I actually recently did some writing for a little side project that You It and I have going on, and I was gonna ask one of the writers on the team to do it, but I'm like, everybody's got so much to do. I don't want to distract them from it. And I was like, this isn't my forte, but whatever. I should learn what I'm asking everyone else to do. I'm shocked, first of all, how long it takes to write a character.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
even just random dialogue without interaction with the player is very slow. It takes a long time, so new respect for that. But then I got to the point where I was supposed to write direction, and I had no idea what to do. I was like, I know how this is going to sound in my head, and I already know who the voice actors are, so I should be able to say, like, so I almost have to go, you know how you said this at this one point when we talked? Like, that's all I can
Right.
think to do. And that's not very helpful.
Yeah, no, and I did get some feedback from some of the VAs I've worked with. They're like, "Oh, thank you God for like giving me like director notes and telling me what you wanted here, because it also saves, the for them what is the hell of like I guess they call it like revision hell. Like, they keep getting
Oh,
they
yeah,
keep
yeah.
getting requests for revisions, and I do
Yeah.
think that is kind of a failure on the whoever's sending them those revisions. I think that's kind of a failure on their part, like to articulate up front what it is they want. And again, that's a failure that I know very well, because I did it a lot.
Yeah.
Kelly Kipper, my lead VA for Machine and Her, like, is has the patience of a saint, because initially we did a lot of those kinds of revisions, and until I learned how to like talk to her and express what I was looking for, because it was like, oh, just give me something mad here, and that's not gonna work. Like, you don't get what you want, and it frustrates your actors and actresses. And that was definitely like everything else, trial by fire, for sure.
Sure. Well, I think one of the things I've been wondering, this would be a dream situation for me. I would love to go shadow Bethesda. Like, I would like literally put my job on hold for like a month and go to do this, because I would just want to see how they work. Like, what do you guys do in the creation kit we don't know about? Because it would just enrich my hobby so much. But I would love to know what they do for that type of thing. For example, because I noticed that there's a record button right in the creation kit where they could record their lines, and that would work well if the person had any acting chops. But if you don't know how to do that, you probably are going to make it worse on the VA if they have to hear a recording of somebody who doesn't know how to voice what they actually mean. You know what I mean? Like, I could be tempted to do that, but if I didn't know how to inflect what I wanted the character to do, maybe I could visualize it in my head, but if I wasn't able to manifest it, then it's just setting them back. So like, that's one potential tool. But then also, if you don't know how to write that, maybe that's the thing, is you do either, and that's why that tool's there, because you can also put in notes for the VAs and the CK.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of that. I wasn't always, but I learned really quickly that, especially while I'm in the heat of writing, like when I'm right in the middle of a scene and I hear what I want. I think you actually said this in your Papyrus video, to start off with your comments. I think and I started doing that with scenes, like rather than the dialogue, I would start off with my actor notes, and because I had that feeling in my head and in my heart in that moment, like, this is what I want the actor to really get across. And that actually made the dialogue come a lot easier. Rather than trying to start with the words and extract an emotion, I started with the emotion and extracted words from that. And I think that really added a lot to my writing and to the VA performance as well, because I never forgot to include script notes again. And it's something that I really learned, again, the hard way. But I think
that's so interesting that would work in writing too. Because that's pretty much how I approach everything. Is like, I take everything and I break it down for, like, if I have any big problem in front of me, whether it's programming or anything else, I break it down into the first layer, and then I just keep breaking it down until I get it to the smallest pieces. And doing it that way seems to be very successful. It's interesting that would work in writing too. Because writing, to me, whenever I've written, it's always just blob onto. It's not like I talk. I just start scribbling and let whatever comes out come out.
Right, and I think a lot of writers do that, and I think it can work in like a novel or a short story. I think it's tougher in games, just because everything has to be so controlled and has to be working towards some objective, narrative or in game or otherwise. And I find starting with that, like the overall, like the core, conflict or what have you, really helps the dialogue sound more natural, and just come out of me more naturally. But again, every writer's different. You'll hear 20 different opinions from 20 different writers on that. Right. So that's just what's worked for me.
Sure. It makes sense though, especially with this narrative structure, and it actually makes a lot of sense of how you work when we're in our writing meetings, trying to figure out how to puzzle through an issue. And it's been a very interesting thing. It was one of those things where I had tried to stay out of. One of the things that I have been trying from the beginning, sometimes successfully, more often not failing at, is not becoming the bottleneck in our project. I don't want everything to pass through me, so I had stayed out of writing, but then I realized I was just approving everything, whether or not it should have been approved, because I had no idea. I was like, that's probably good, let's do it. Which is not the best way to manage a big project. So I've been trying to now just pick up enough so that I can understand what works and doesn't. And it's been really fascinating going along this big journey of our next quest thing. Because in Conqueror now we're doing it more in real time, of figuring stuff out as we go. And the next expansion for us is to a little more pre-planned.
Right.
Which is interesting. It's an interesting ride, and it gives me so much respect for. Because the thing we're creating there is just like a fraction of Fallout 4, what Fallout 4's got for content, and it feels like such an epic thing we're doing.
And like you said about man hours, I mean, it's unbelievable what we've spent already, just on that fraction.
Just in meetings. Yeah, just
In
in
meetings,
meetings.
yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Without even considering the writing or implementation.
Yep, just getting that vision strong, so that the writing and implementation is, going to get shredded as little as possible. But those meetings, are so important, and I think they've really helped so much. And uh, I think I think people are going to see that. I think the work kind of reflects that right now. I'm excited about it, to say the very least.
Well, I am excited to finally play your mod, which you let me see. Like you gave me that video like almost a year
Almost
ago.
a year, yeah.
And then I didn't. Well, it's like 9 months, and so I finally get to play it soon. I really hope to see. I actually want to see like Al Chessbreach's reaction to it, because I love his take on mods. It'll be because he's such a goofball with them, and then like your mod has such a serious tone to it. That'll be really funny to see how he handles that.
Yeah, we'll see.
I'm not sure how I'll approach it either. I've been trying to be the entertainer and not quite as much of the silliness, but
Yeah, I mean,
we'll see how much I can let your characters talk over me talking.
well, and hey, you don't have to do the story either. Like, you can just go run around listening to Kit yell at raiders. Like,
That's true.
If the story's too kind of dark or whatever, it's like, let's just get out of here and go shoot some guys. There's lots of guys to shoot.
No matter what, you
Fallout.
get a cool companion out
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
And a cool
Which
radio station.
You went pretty
too.
deep with that.
What's that?
Did you went pretty deep with the companion?
Yeah.
Because that was the script I worked on, was your menu system of you get to control all of the aggression levels and
Yes.
the what kind of combat, and then
Yeah, like follow
you've got
distance and yeah.
yeah,
That
that stuff seems like it should just be automatic in the game. It's
Yeah.
like that you shouldn't have even had to go through all that effort. That should have just been like built into the game to do with all companions.
It took a whole lot to get that. Even the bad version of the script that I had, the unsafe version of the script that I had.
Yeah.
It took a long time to get it right, but when it did start, or I don't want to say working, but when it did start, the cause and effect was happening, and I could see that on the screen. I was like, man, yeah, this is really like what I want in a companion. One that I don't have to talk to tell her to pick locks. I don't have to talk to
Right.
that kind of stuff. And I have gotten a lot of feedback on that's like, man, I feel like this is what it should have been like. Like you can just go up to a locked door and she'll click the button and she'll unlock it for you. Like
Yeah.
and I tried to streamline some of that stuff just to set her apart from the other companions, because I know that it's like high quality companions. There's not a lot of competition. It's mostly Heather, and again, Llama has just been amazing. Like just talking with me and supporting me and just telling me like, hey, it's gonna be okay, just breathe. But I've told people, and I think I actually posted this on the Nexus page. Somebody was like, oh, why did you use the vanilla companion system? Like what? Geez, there's so many other followers you can download that don't use that. So like why? And I talk about like those other followers again outside of situations like Heather, and and there are other very good deep companions available, but not a whole lot. Those are just very simple. They just follow you, like the the lesser followers. I guess I don't want to say that, but the ones that don't have as much work in them. That exist outside the vanilla follower system. They just kind of follow you and carry your stuff, and they'll shoot when you shoot for the most part, but that's kind of all they do. And
Right. They all feel like Lydia's.
right,
They're just
yeah, exactly. Sworn to
sworn
carry our burdens. Yeah, and that's it. And if you want, a companion that does more than that, like it's so much more work than I would have ever imagined. But I do think it's something that is worth it. Having kind of what feels like at least a real person to
Yeah, and I
with
think
you.
I think there's a lot of people now who like once they fall in love with a companion, like they will just keep that on their character with their character forever. Like I know there are a lot of diehard Heather Kasdan fans who will just like that is it. I'm not
Yeah,
playing the game
yep.
without that character. Or in Skyrim, I know a lot of people are like that with Inigo. Like there's just the character is so well developed and so rounded out that it's like it's hard, rest of the game feels dull without them.
Yep, 100%. I'm a Heather lifer myself. Like that, she's part of my load order just always, like by default. And I have been very flattered. Like I've had some people, they like in my Discord server called Kit their murder daughter, and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much what I was going for actually. Like that's perfect. Like they're like, oh,
Wow, see, now it sounds like a perfect companion for Kinggath's Raider playthrough. To have a murder
Yeah,
daughter.
no, I mean, she'll go right along with you. She's not, she won't question you or think that that's. People say, oh, is it like, will she leave me if I'm mean to people? And I'm like, no, it's not like that. At some point, she may kind of look up to you for being that way. It just depends on how you play.
Yeah.
So.
This is a conversation that you and I had at one point that is something very unique to games, and I don't see a lot of games doing it, and there's a lot of backlash against doing it the opposite way. So there's a lot of in mainstream games now, and a lot of like Gamergate was all based around a lot of this, is this idea that there are a lot of special interests cramming down on gamers, and they just want to be left alone. And like people don't want to be preached to. And I think one of the things that you and I agreed on that games can do uniquely is they can just set it up in such a way that the protagonist can just agree with the player. Let the player choose almost choose the morality right in front of you, where you set up those moral questions, and you can still have those deep moments, but then just go along with what the player wants. And then you're not preaching to them. They get to feel like the game is speaking with them. And that's something unique to games. You couldn't do that in a movie or in a book. And you don't see a lot of people doing that in games. And I guess it's tough to do that, because then you're forced to look at the world from both perspectives. And not a lot of people want to do that. But games are such a great medium to do that. And I don't know why more games just don't embrace that idea.
Honestly, like, my only guess is, I think I did mention this to you before, but like, my only guess is that like it's hard to view the world through, the two different lenses. And I think it's especially hard to write the world through two different lenses in a believable way. Because to write, something believably, like, you really have to believe it. Or at least you have to get in the mindset of someone who does believe that. And that's tough. That's tough for a writer in any medium. And I am 100% with you. I wish that's what games were doing. Rather than, especially ones that have open world and choice and things like that. Like, I think rather than preaching to players and trying to advocate for a worldview, I think it's more interesting to present, like moral quandaries and things that are more gray and less black and white, and say, well, what do you think, player? And no matter which one you think, and not that it necessarily has to just be two different opinions,
right.
But yeah, like, no matter which one you think, like, to have a well-written and compassionately, like, conveyed message, no matter which path you take. And I think that's something that's just kind of a big ask for a lot of writers. And I think a lot of games want to avoid controversy, which is unfortunate, because I don't think controversy is a bad thing necessarily. I just think it has to be, whatever you're going to be. If you're going to be controversial, just do it good, like, do it as well as you can. And yeah, like you said, give the player that agency. And because especially if you have an open world game and you don't do that, I think it really falls flat for a lot of people. They do feel like they're being lectured to, and that's, as a writer, that's something that I just am allergic to. Like, definitely, like, I really want to avoid that feeling.
Yeah, and I get going the other way too, of like that sometimes, if your character is a particular backstory and they're very passionate about this thing, that can work as well. But I think it just has to. Then I think you need to, like, when you go that route, you just need to make sure that your game is advertised to hit the right audience. The audience is going to follow that, and then it won't feel so bad. Like, a game like Doom, they know who their audience is, and they speak accordingly, and they go all in on masculinity, and they don't mess around with it. And it's great because of it. And, like, they just embrace that. And, like, yes, people are going to be naysaying and trash on it, but they're not the target audience, so it doesn't
I remember
matter.
One of my ex-boyfriends used to play this game. I don't know if anyone even knows this game or remembers it, but it was called, oh God, what was it called? Painkiller. And it was just like a Doom game. Like, if you look it up on YouTube videos, Painkiller, that's what it was called. And you just run around. There's a gun that shoots, like, ninja stars and bolts of lightning to death metal music. And that's, like, what that game is. And it's huge levels with thousands of enemies. And I would just, like, every time I would walk in the room, he'd be playing this game. And it was like, I remember thinking, like, man, that is a game that knows what it is and what it's doing. And I respect that, I respect any game that, like, has that, like, we talk about that solid vision. I mean, there it is right there, No questions asked.
If it's not metal, it doesn't belong.
Exactly, Like, it was, I mean, honestly, I'm sure the new Doom games have this beat, but if you go look at it, it must this must have been like over 10 years ago. It was pretty intense at the time. You could like shoot stakes at enemies and pin them to the wall, and it was crazy. Like, um,
Oh,
so yeah, I agree with you. I think, if you like, Life is Strange is an awesome game series, and I think they know how to kind of sell themselves and market, like what this game is. It's not Doom, like it's not going to pretend to be
right,
that.
right.
Um, and I think you can kind of take that in any direction. But if you want to have the player choice, I think it would be better to, and if you have to, because it's games and it's a collaborative medium, get writers with different viewpoints, to actually be
Right,
able
right.
to write those different paths, like respectfully and um, truthfully, if that makes sense. Like,
Well, what's really interesting about it is that you can do it not only from the good guy's perspective. Like you can not only make the protagonist agree with the player, you can then make the antagonist disagree with the
yeah,
player, and you can have a dynamic
hmm
antagonist too, which is really,
and yeah,
which could be really
that would
fun.
actually be really interesting. Yeah, to have the antagonist respond to you in a way that, where, because
So it's
most of the time the antagonist just sets the whole agenda for a story,
right.
and this way, yeah, you get that back and forth that you could never get with a linear medium like books or movies.
Yeah, so it's something that I've been very interested in, and I remember you pitched a quest idea to me, and like, yes, that's exactly what I want to see in RPGs because we don't get enough of that. We don't get enough of like just let the player be right. This is their
hmm
story, so like why tell them they're wrong?
Right, because it's, I mean, yeah, the lecturing thing, that's, I don't think that's ever a good look. I don't think it works. I don't think it's good storytelling.
It's not
No, it's not
productive
productive.
either because it's never
It's
going to hit them
no,
correctly. Like if they were open to that idea in the first place, you're not going to be the one that sells
no,
them unless you do it in an like. Usually, I think the way people have their minds change is when they were leaning toward an idea and then they see an example of why it's true, and then it'll push them over the edge. At least that's how it's always worked for me. When I find my mind changed, I
hmm
was leaning toward that, and then something happens in a natural way that wasn't be forced down my throat, but I just
right,
saw it unfold and I was like, ah, okay.
yeah,
So like I think you what is it, the you can't lead a horse to water? Is that
exactly.
the phrase? I think that was the
hmm
idea there. Is you just kind of show them the way. Don't shove it down their throat.
Right. Just show them that it exists. And I think,
Yeah.
like you said, like when my mind has been changed about something, it's usually kind of a slow burn. It's not a big moment where I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God, yes, but just like, huh, the more I think about that, the more I kind of get it. And I love moments like that again. Like I love the big aha moments, but I think the ones where you genuinely have your worldview changed are usually a little kind of more slow burns. And I think that's okay too.
Yeah. Like I definitely didn't start fearing quantum mechanics after finishing Infinite.
Right?
Did
I,
not shatter my worldview forever.
I
It was only for an
I
hour.
had to read some like kind of timeline explanation about that whole thing because I didn't understand exactly what was happening in all the timelines, but I understood that I was like just blown away by the story and like the feelings that I was having and the questions that I had and like and that coming back to Bioshock Infinite, that was an ending that has stuck with me ever since the first time I experienced it. I still think of it sometimes.
I honestly think I honestly think that the whole reason Fallout 4 exists the way it does is because of Bioshock 1.
Oh, you
I
think
think
so?
when they I think they saw the "Would you kindly" moment and like we have to have
The
that,
big twist.
and then they set up the whole father thing just because they wanted to emulate that. That's why they did the whole dialogue system. Like everything was building to that. That's what I think happened.
Yeah, I definitely, I actually think that's probably pretty true. Like the big twist. Part of me feels like the dialogue system may have been kind of a BioWare. So I think they looked at Mass Effect,
Yeah,
like
that's true. Definitely looks like Mass
yeah, like the
Effect. Yeah.
dialogue wheel, but they really. And I tried to duplicate this as much as I could in The Machine and Her, and it, with mixed success. I mean, I'll be honest. Like with the investigate branches, you could there was just the whole waterfall system of dialogue. Like you could just open up all these new paths, and that was very difficult to do with the dialogue system in Fallout 4. And I think they were trying to do that because they saw it in the Mass Effect series, and everyone loved that system, but it was a little bit too limited. And I think that they kind of, I think they even said in Fallout 76, the next update is going to get rid of the dialogue wheel altogether. So
Yeah, they're going back to the old
yeah,
school
so
route.
I think that kind of shows that they realized that, man, we tried that, it didn't work. Let's go back to the way we
Yeah.
had before.
Well, I think they need to try it because they show the world like this is what it could be
hmm
like. and then like this is what we're gonna go back to, and then you can kind of balance back and forth.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons I think we rejected it so much, and I say we, and I think that's because a lot of the more hardcore Bethesda RPG fans want a particular experience. Obviously, the sales said that was the right move for them. But I think one of the reasons we are frustrated by it is because there's such a long tail on these games. Like it's going to be like 10 years between titles. So then it's like, damn it, I wanted another Fallout experience, and you took it away from me. That's kind of where some of that frustration comes from.
Absolutely. Well, and it limits, the ability to role play the way you want to, and all of that stuff kind of factors into it. I feel like, and but yeah, I cannot imagine what that added to the development time, that whole system, and the voiced player and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, here's hoping to our AI overlords being able to figure out a way to do it.
I'm going to hold you to that. I'm curious. I'm very curious to see what will happen.
Well, if I'm still running the podcast in 10 years, we'll have a revisit and we'll discuss AI driven narratives.
And the whole time I'm just gonna be like, is this even really him I'm talking to?
It'll be my AI podcast bot.
It could just be both of us. We'll just be heads in jars somewhere and just God.
The old Futurama feature. Right. I like it. Well, Nika, it has been fantastic talking with you. Is there anything that you wanted to bring up, maybe about Machine and Her? You can talk to people who are about to play it or maybe just played it.
No, if you've already played it, thank you so much for giving it a shot. And if you're thinking about playing it, it's something that I definitely think Fallout fans will enjoy, or I hope so. And other than that, no, I'm just it's been an honor to be on here and chatting with you, and I've loved talking with you as always.
Fantastic. Well, we will hopefully see your work again in the very near future with the next Sim Settlements expansion. But otherwise, you guys can go check out NikaCola's work and the Machine and Her. Definitely leave some comments. Leave some, especially positive comments, or constructive comments.
Yes, please.
Don't keep the rage to yourself.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks.